Deadly Morsel, Book 5 of the Wicked Witches, Curses and Kisses series by Juliann Whicker. Part 1 of 3. Huevo. Chapter 1. The scratching of pen against paper shouldn't have been enough to make it essential that I gouge out my ears and my eyes in case I accidentally glanced up at the mage on the opposite side of the table. I growled and smoke curled out of my mouth, obstructing the figures and assets lists. I ignored the other mage and focused on my own work, but when he started humming the theme from Holz's Third Symphony, I'd had it. I threw my pen down and stood. He raised his eyes slowly, giving me a look of mild interest. He'd trimmed his dark red mustache and was growing out sideburns and a goatee, the sort of facial hair I remembered from my childhood. I could still remember that goatee as he'd bent over me, the deck slashed by rain driven by hurricane-speed winds. He'd grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, demanding to know what I'd done, where my mother was. "She's worth fighting for," he said in that voice, the one that didn't care no matter how much he pretended. I dug my claws into the table. I was fighting for her. I was fighting myself and every selfish impulse I had so that I could keep her safe. How long could I fight against my nature, so deeply ingrained and only emphasized by my dragon? My chest ached with every breath, deeper than the skin she'd carved her name into, heart, bone, soul. "When are you going back on your boat? The damage is done." He raised an eyebrow and continued scratching on paper without looking at it. It's much more interesting to scrape back Huntsman from the brink of complete dissolution than continue growing the dull, plodding beast that it was when I left it to you. You left me Jasper, who had given the deception sorcerer everything he needed to bring our family to its knees. I left you. You were a competent business mage at age 8. Apparently, you've gotten worse in your old age. I don't need you interfering with my life, not now. It's too late to undo the damage in time. She's determined to marry the most eligible mage she can find. She didn't strike me as particularly pecuniary. I closed my eyes and gripped the table. My father never should have seen Penny, touched her, tried to understand anything about her. I inhaled deeply around the ache in my chest. I could take her. It would be so simple. She wouldn't protest. She would kiss me and hold me and beg me to tell her that I loved her. I straightened up and stepped through side. My father was back. Good. He could take over Huntsman Inc. It didn't need me any more than Penny did. I came out in the burning lands, the sun beating down harder and harder with every step, aimless steps. I'd flown over this land on my first trip out, riding a magic carpet with Ian and Teddy. Teddy was obsessed with finding a dragon, and it sounded like something that would irritate my father. Ian went along because that's what he always did. The carpet had been ripped apart by the wyverns, leaving us to walk. I fingered my cheek. That's where I got those scars. I had more than that on my chest and shoulders from it carrying me away to feed to its young. I'd managed to shove my emergency dagger into the joint beneath its shoulder. That's what Teddy was yelling at me while they ran beneath me, instructions on how to kill it. Ian was the one who spelled the landing so my 11-year-old body wasn't shattered against the rocks. Good times. Teddy was the smart one, Ian the talented one, and I was the idiot without fear, without hesitation. I'd broken both of them, killed my mother, and let Sooth take over Huntsman. My father was right. It was my responsibility, and I'd completely screwed up. I sat down in the hot, swirling dirt and leaned over my knees, staring at the smudge of a horizon. My eyes were dry and gritty, but I didn't blink. It wasn't necessary. I wasn't a thinking mage, not a contract mage, not a spell mage, not a tech mage. I could rip people apart better than anyone else, but it didn't seem particularly useful. I should go find a war or something and fight until I felt better, but how could I ever feel better when Zack was the mage who had Penny? He should have her. He'd loved Pitch forever. He'd be smarter than me, able to protect her where I couldn't. He'd love her better. He didn't have a dragon in his head. She was as close as a witch could come to a tech mage. They were the perfect pair. Except that their hair didn't match and Zack would never dress her in mustaches. I shook my head and stood. I started stripping, pacing out a star in the dust that flared green water fire before it faded down. It would protect my precious coat while I took care of business. I kept my pants on, boring pants that weren't bedazzled or anything. I had a limited supply of those that would have to last me the rest of my life. How long could I last without my spark? As long as it took. I wasn't a suicidal mage. Homicidal, possibly. I grinned as I slashed across my chest with my claws until blood dripped freely down my body. I walked briskly north. North? Did Darkside have directions? Sort of. This was up direction. The world had changed directions and axis a few times according to dragon memory. That's what happened to a world inhabited by sorcerers who messed around with things, also dragons. I was 1.5 miles from my coat when I saw the first wyvern circling. I inhaled deeply and then cast a quick spell that would send it on its way. Not the right family. It took 2 more miles before a wyvern in shades of blood dust appeared on the horizon. I inhaled deeply and smiled. The right family. It took a lot of time to enchant and train a wyvern properly, not to mention an entire family like the group that had attacked my island with the cray. The witch militia could claim that they were out of bed with Sooth all they wanted, but as long as he was alive, I'd expect him to be playing both sides of every conflict that involved Penny. The cray hadn't been clear about who provided the wyverns, eyes shifty like they didn't know. I fell over on the ground from loss of blood, after I'd ripped open my chest a few more times. I lay there in the dirt until the wyvern grabbed me, its claws piercing deeply into my body as it lifted me into the air. I carefully eased out my knife from my waistband and with a quick movement stabbed its throat and scooped out the jewels it carried. It dropped me and screamed, shooting a blast of fire at me that singed my eyebrows as I fell. I waited until I almost hit the ground before stepping through side into my bedroom at Rosewood. I dropped the bloody dragon hoard on the table and sat on the edge of the couch to study the gems. There was a ruby-encrusted signet ring. Interesting. A milky opal caught my eye, but that was the dragon in me. No, I was looking for a sign of the sorcerer. There. A rock. A wyvern wouldn't be able to see past the enchantment, but a dragon could, a great dragon anyway. I fingered through the pile, separating the rock from the rest of them. I'd have to do some chemist to find the origin of the sorcerer, but first I had to retrieve my coat. I stepped through side and stopped at the sight of a mage levitating above my most precious possession. His suit was mustard yellow with neon purple stripes. Mitch! He tumbled forward, landing in a messy roll before he spun around to smile at me manically. The green mage. You look more red covered in blood. I thought your blood would be green. That's disappointing. Are you here to die? If so, continue to linger near what belongs to me. He glanced over at the coat, then exhaled deeply and took 2 steps to the left. Still closer to the coat than I was, but he probably couldn't break my spell and take the coat before I could reach it, and him. Are you hunting wyvern or sorcerers? I could tell you who the sorcerer with a pack of tame wyverns is, and you wouldn't have to use your own pretty Daysider skin as bait. Your witch wouldn't like you ripping yourself apart, would she? I smiled broadly. I have no witch, so I couldn't say. Tell me about Poppy. I know nothing about her other than that she was a cat. His eyes glimmered, one gold, one blue, both completely mad. She wanted a mage who would rip her apart. It's always a pleasure to fulfill your witch's desires. All the same, I never got beneath her skin as deeply as Pitch. She got beneath your skin as well. A witch who doesn't have to be present to destroy everything. Such a witch. I thought I would destroy her, but the deception sorcerer is what killed Poppy, however much Pitch hurt her. I would think that you'd destroy both of them. He smiled widely. All in good time. Perhaps she could teach me to forget Poppy. Such a witch. I growled at him. He smiled and shrugged. I can't help it. You're so possessive of something you claim not to own. It's terribly amusing. Why do you wear yellow and purple? It's hideous. He glanced down at his suit, then shrugged. Poppy liked it. There was a thread of real emotion in his voice. Whatever games he'd played, he'd grown attached to his witch. As fun as this is, what are you doing here? I have important things to do, like wash blood off a rock. He turned to face south and stretched out his arms. The dust swirled around him, playfully at first before it grew stronger, growing in fury until it was a cyclone reaching its fingers into the sky before Mitch dropped his arms and the cyclone fell along with it. Hell? Hail? I'm mad, you know. I started mad and I'm getting progressively more sane the longer I spend in Darkside. Isn't that peculiar? Hail is the sorcerer with the wyverns. He snapped his fingers. You follow very well. Madness is comfortable to you. You'll grow madder and madder without her. I grow saner and saner without Poppy. We are the same, you and I. In every way that matters. We lost our witches. Do you want to play? You're already bloody, but you haven't been ripped through. I fingered the claw gouge the wyvern had left in my chest. I don't fight with allies. He raised his eyebrows. Allies? I shrugged. Until you betray me. He gave me a sickeningly lopsided smile. I already have. He turned and started walking, waving his hand as he went, sending the dust swirling in patterns only he could see. His madness was something else. Inane. He seemed particularly useless. A great deal like me. I retrieved my coat, then stepped through side, coming out next to the Chinese restaurant. I stared in the window for a moment before I stepped back into the darkness where Jello waited. If you wish to die, I could eat you. I ignored him, climbing on his back and settling down as he crouched, then sprang into the air. He knew where to go. I had a debt to pay. I wasn't suicidal, but I deserved death. At least pain. More pain than the aching inside my chest. I broke through the darkness around Penny's mother's house, the dilapidated Victorian monstrosity that looked haunted as I flew Jello near it. He landed and I stepped off his back. I rubbed his brow bone. He growled at me and launched back into the sky. I paced in front of the house for 2 hours before the front door creaked open and a dark figure peered out at me. Do you know what time it is? Revere sounded like a grumpy old man who would kick kids off his lawn. No idea. I broke Penny's contract. I should pay for that. You also broke my protective barriers. Twice. I should pay for that too. What are you offering? I held out my arms, still covered in dried blood. He sighed, audibly before he stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. He walked over the sagging floor and down the steps. His pace was slow, even, his eyes exhausted beyond worlds, but he didn't show it in his smooth movements as he pulled out a black firesword and saluted me before lunging. I didn't exactly expect the spellmaster to go back to his roots and pull out the Blackheart chemist captain. He was good. Better than good, beautiful. I called my own green firesword and barely stayed away from the edge of his blade, the burning black sword drawing my eyes when I couldn't afford a moment of distraction. He disarmed me almost effortlessly after 10 minutes of dueling, and I crouched beneath the threat of his black fire, staring at him. How did you become a spellmaster when you're a genius chemist? Were you always good at Sophos? He raised his sword, shook it until the flames went out and put it away inside his jacket. He turned and headed back to the house. Wait, how did you do it? I grabbed his shoulder and he spun around, palm facing me, sending out a shock spell that sent me stumbling away from him. It's called necessity. If a Dayside mage wants to adapt to Darkside, thrive, give a witch a place, protect her, he does what he must. Why are you here, huntsman? You are not a mage who glances backwards. I ran a hand through my hair. What can I do? I can't protect her. Sooth has his claws in huntsman, Dayside and Darkside. The corp is crumbling around me and I can't do anything. He studied me for a long time. You want something to do? Bored with incompetence. I'm here to pay for my broken contract. Do you think it gives me some satisfaction to see an incompetent mage's precious ego disintegrate? Maybe a bit. He smiled and I shifted uncomfortably beneath that stare. Your men are swearing fealty to you. Why? I have some immunity to the deception, sorcerer. Through the dragon. Say! I hesitated, then nodded. You're immune, that's something. Not much. He shrugged and paced around me, looking me up and down. Your spellcraft is terrible. You have potential. Why are you so bad? My father thought it was important. You're going to have to let go of your issues if you're going to become something she can use. I frowned at him, having to turn my head to follow him. I can't have her. He shrugged and glanced at me. But that's not essential. Being something she can use, isn't that what you crave? I nodded. What does that make me? Motivated. First thing, watch your knee.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 2. I'd gone to sleep in an island paradise and woken up in my bed at Rosewood. I felt like someone had stuffed my head with sawdust and batted it around like a pinata. No one had asked me if I wanted to be drugged or spelled unconscious, so I missed the ride home in the jet. If they had asked, I would have agreed. They should have asked Zach. Just because he owned me didn't mean he could drug me and drag me around any time he wanted. I stumbled over to Senior's cage, fed and watered him, and then got dressed out of Drake's lounge clothes. Drake. I stopped moving and slid my fingers over my shoulder to trace the lines engraved in my skin. He loved me. He actually, truly, honestly loved me. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced my mind to focus. Contracts. Those didn't take magic, just energy. I had lots of that. What I lacked was knowledge. I had until my birthday to marry a Dayside mage. No one had told me why, or if they had, I wasn't able to remember it. Infuriating that my father prevented me from remembering anything. He was the deception sorcerer Drake was fighting. He had to be. I got together the books about mage contracts I'd borrowed from the library before my spontaneous vacation and took them to class. In linguistics, I was having a perfectly nice time learning about clause openings when Zach came over and ripped the book out of my hands. You skipped tech this morning. I stared at him, took one step closer, and yanked the book back. Yes, I did. So fail me. He scowled, forehead wrinkling as he crossed his arms, fingers twitching. You're just going right back to how things were before. Before I was poisoned and scratched, before he'd spent ages healing me at Drake's beach house. I licked my lips. I came up with a plan for your suit. I don't really want any feedback, but you can look at it if you have to. I sighed and rifled through my books to find the slip of paper with a technical drawing on it. He snatched it greedily and stared at it for a long, long time before he raised his head and nodded. Yeah, I have no idea what any of this means. You're going to have to learn to actually collaborate at some point. Do you have plans for the car? I'll let you take lead on that project, and I'll be a good little helper. But this mesh suit isn't going to be screwed up by your usual ugly design. He gasped, and his eyes widened. Ugly? From someone who bedazzled Drake's suits? I shrugged and turned away. I'm just saying that your aesthetic is a little boxy and lacking in grace and proportion. You can ruin the car, but your next mech suit is going to be sublime. He narrowed his eyes before he finally nodded. Fine. We'll work on the suit in the morning, car in the afternoon. We'll have a contest afterwards to see which is the most appealing. Viney can judge. And the rest of the school. I shrugged before I remembered Ian. I have ballet practice with Ian after school. Fine. After that, you don't need to spend hours and hours with him. I really wanted to do well at the final show when I danced with Drake in front of the rest of the world. 3 hours. Then dinner. Then the car. Then studying mage contracts. Bonbons and macaroons. I did not have time for school. But it was important to keep up appearances. He cleared his throat. You don't have to do the final show with Drake. You could get another mage instead. Ian or even me if you wanted. I don't suck. I patted his head. His hair was kind of soft and silky. What kind of shampoo did he use? I leaned closer and sniffed it. Strawberry. I grinned at him. You've been buying my darkly sweet shampoo. He jerked away and ran a hand through his hair to fix it or make it messy. Whatever. You know how important it is to have shampoo you can drink in case you're in a shipwreck and have nothing else. Shut up. See you at 6 in the dining room. After we eat, the car. He spun around and went to speak kind of aggressively to Travis, like plaid pants were irritating or something. Drake wasn't in ballet class. No. Ian was there instead. I didn't ask why, and he didn't say anything, just was the perfect partner in every way. Except that he wasn't Drake. I stopped walking and leaned against the wall while I ached. I needed him to touch my bond, to touch me. I shook my head and straightened up. I didn't have time for that. I had things to do. Serious things. I went to my room, secured the door, and called Teddy. Penny Lane, what can I possibly do for you? Cray attack? Not today. You're supposed to sort of be my contract mage, right? I mean, not my mage, just a mage that will help me with my contracts, right? Ugh. Why did I have to deal with the wolves? He laughed. This silky, smooth sound that made me shiver. He left a lot unsaid that I didn't delve into. I want to understand mage contracts, but I feel like I'm missing huge gaps. Can we do a study session sometime? He paused for a few minutes. Study session? At Rosewood? Yes. I'm sort of stuck here. I can meet you in Fairfield if you'd like, at the library or something. Do they have a library? I don't even know. No. I'll come to Rosewood. We can study in your room. Was your mother really serene night? No night with my mother was ever serene. How about Wednesday, 8 o'clock? I'll be there. He hung up, and I was left staring at my phone like it had betrayed me. What was I thinking, playing with Teddy Prince, the second worst mage in the world? Well, if I couldn't play with number 1, I had to get what I could. No, I needed to see Drake. We should do the bond thing in a totally calm and collected kind of way. No, I had to practice dance with Ian. Alone in the studio with Ian, he was incredibly normal. He didn't leer at me once, and his hands felt completely indifferent on my skin. Weird, but not unpleasant. I actually relaxed around him and really put myself into the exquisite lines of the dance. After 3 hours, we were standing together, his arms around me while I swayed to the side when Zach started clapping, the sound sharp cutting through the focus I'd put into becoming lines. Ian's arms tightened for a moment before he stepped away. He handed me a clean towel. Good work. Watch your arch. Flexibility without strength will lead to injuries. Yeah, you too. I rolled my eyes and headed toward Zach. You ready to cherry up the monster? What's first, boss? Strip her down to the bones and rebuild from scratch. Zach grabbed me around my sweaty shoulders and pulled me against him as we walked down the aisle of the small theater where I practiced with Ian. First, you need a shower. You smell terrible. I'll grab dinner. We'll eat and work. Yeah. I shoved him away from me. No one asked you to smell me. So, yeah, working on the car with Zach was fun, kind of annoying because he had to sit and explain stuff instead of just following whatever I did. Not that I couldn't figure out what he wanted and do it a little bit better than he asked for, but it was still annoying to have to listen and follow instructions. He was a better helper than I was. Still, he clearly had experience with large vehicles that I completely lacked. Okay, I admit it, he was pretty brilliant, and he didn't look half bad covered in motor oil, but my shoulder ached almost as much as my heart by the time I wiped my hands on a rag and headed to the library. How did Drake handle the agony if he really loved me? How could I understand mage contracts when I didn't understand mages? Lester sat down beside me and opened up his books. I turned to stare at him. He didn't notice for a long time before he finally raised his head and nodded at me, swinging his shaggy mane. Lester, what motivates a mage? It depends on the mage. You. What motivates you? He frowned for a long time. Knowledge first, power second, influence third. Stoneborough is also a knowledge-first sort of mage. Huntsman values influence most. How is influence different than power? Power is about what you can do. Influence is about what others do. But a powerful leader makes others do what he wants. Yes, but he doesn't make them want to do what he wants. I wrinkled up my forehead, trying to understand. You're saying influence is about changing people instead of forcing them to bow to your will. That sounds like my grandmama. World changers. I smiled slightly and handed him a lollipop before I refocused on the book in front of me. It was 2 a.m. before I finished up for the night. Lester walked me back the uneaten lollipop tucked into his pocket as we walked through the halls. The next day was Tuesday. I made a batch of lollipops early that morning for my princesses and blueberry and pecan crunch for Missy and Carl's son. My darling girls were so beautiful, and for a little while I forgot about the ache in my shoulder. My heart. Then I walked down the hall where I might accidentally run into Drake. No Drake. Just the normal humans. Well, normal if Darkside survivors could be considered normal in any way. I flopped beside Missy on the couch and stole some of her chocolate mints. She smiled slightly and took one of the lollipops I held out to her. "How are you?" she asked. I shrugged. I don't know enough about mages. I want to ask you a million questions, but I don't want you to feel bad remembering. She hesitated, then glanced around at the other humans who were carefully not looking at us. Sebastian wasn't around. I don't mind talking about Narcolo. It's kind of a relief, actually. That's the point of this place, somewhere everyone understands, but sometimes I feel like we're all trying to ignore it so it will go away. It can't go away. It happened. I'm who I am because of what I experienced. I can't go back to being that girl on her way to the library to check out books on magical romance. Everything was different back then. Poor, hungry. Going to Darkside was like a dream. Everything richer and darker and stronger. I just pretended I was in a dream and floated along with it. The others in my group went mad very quickly because they couldn't separate Darkside from reality. I don't know. Maybe I did go mad. I met a lot of mages. So many witches. What did they want? She tilted her head from side to side. Novelty, usually. The younger ones are burning with ambition, but as they get older, jaded, they're searching for diversion as life loses all meaning. That's before the madness. The madness gives them a second period of burning, but they break you quickly when they forget to be careful. What stage was Narcolo at? She frowned. Narcolo was different. He was a seeker, a finder, a knower. He never got tired of learning, of hunting. He could find anything, whether it was an object, a person, or a speck of knowledge. He had so much knowledge inside his head. He liked showing me his thoughts, teaching me languages and customs. He understood Dayside and he talked to me about it, having me explain difficult concepts like faith and trust, hope and kindness. That was before he bought me from the mavens. So his greatest desire was knowledge. She shrugged and rubbed her arms with what was left of her fingers. He took everything I taught him about love and used it to see how much I could love him. I was his pet and love was my project. I failed, though. I cared more about the lives of those humans than pleasing my master. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, going to the mavens to report Narcolo for eating humans. But I'd do it again. No, I'd have found a way to free them myself. Carl came over and put a hand on Missy's shoulder. Merbeth wanted the love of a human as well. She tired of the dead for company and wanted someone live, a pet she could teach tricks. She taught me so many tricks. Sebastian thinks that was love. Perhaps it was. Not human love. him," the bartender said, coming over and sitting on the arm of the couch next to me. "But human love can be a horrible thing, too. I see it a lot in my work. People coming in and confessing their sins. They don't eat each other, but sometimes they're even worse. Are you trying to understand the mage, Penny?" He said my name kind of carefully, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say it. I smiled at him brightly. "I'm trying to understand mage contracts. I need to understand the nature of mages so I can understand how they work, how they can be manipulated, how they can change mage nature." He nodded slowly. "That's the best way to deal with them. You can't trust their emotions. Even if they love you, that doesn't mean that they can control their instincts. They keep what they love locked far away from any threat." Missy nodded. "That's why I thought he loved me, because he started building walls around me. Stopped allowing any visitors, stopped taking me out." I sighed. Love. My marriage contract with Drake had been universally detailed on things like how many children we would have, but also their rights. I needed to see the contract between my mother and my father. Would she still have it? How could I find it? Narcolo could find anything. I looked at Missy, at her one sad gray eye. No, Missy wasn't my pet. She was my friend. I wasn't going to sacrifice her to get what I wanted. I didn't have to be wicked since I wasn't really a witch. Not without magic. I leaned over and gave her a hug. She smelled so nice. I'm glad that Drake found you. You're nobody's pet. Just because you don't have magic doesn't make you any less powerful. That's why they want you. Because you have what they lack. Soul. Do you want to go to church with me on Sunday? I'll make you a pretty eye patch if you like. She smiled and shook her head. No eye patch, but I think I'd like to try church. I'll give you a ride, the bartender offered with an easy smile. He'd developed that smile from years in Darkside surviving who knew what. I smiled at him and gave him a lollipop. It was on my way out that I realized that Narcolo could find anything, even the mage who broke Poppy. I hadn't even thought about revenge. I was a truly terrible, horrible witch.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 3. Penny Lane. I turned a corner and stopped while my heart felt like it was going to rupture in my chest. She stood outside my door reading a book, her red gold curls cascading around her face until she looked up. Her enormous eyes softened when she saw me. "Drake, do you have a second?" "A second?" "No. 1,000,000,000 seconds wouldn't be enough. 1 second was too much. What do you have in mind?" I gave her the most dissolute smile I'd picked up from Ian as I walked closer. I could either move closer or run away as fast as I could. That would look like I cared. She tucked the massive tome beneath her arm and put her palms against my chest. "Can you touch my shoulder? It aches." The feel of her against my chest, the ache that had grown until I'd felt I would never feel anything else, made it almost possible to breathe. I inhaled shudderingly the intoxicating scent of Penny Lane and dusty books before I slid my hand over her shoulder to her back, somehow not digging my claws into her. "We really should do something about that." My voice was too much like a growl. She blushed like I'd said something suggestive. Not that I meant giving the bond to Zach. She ripped my shirt open with that same sweet blush before she traced over her name as though the glamour wasn't there. She pulled the pain out of me as she touched me, relieving more than the bond ache. I curled my fingers and shredded the back of her shirt absently. I touched her skin, sliding around my initials, but she had so much more skin begging to be touched. My hand slid down her back to the base of her spine. She gasped and jerked like I'd bitten her. That was an idea. I brushed her hair away, revealing the soft, sweet side of her throat. "Drake, you missed our Tuesday." I froze. I couldn't miss our Tuesday because we didn't have that anymore. I stepped away from her and spelled my shirt closed. She'd ripped off the buttons. "I heard you were there. I'm glad you're still seeing Missy." She pressed her lips together and took a step closer to me. "Drake, I'm not finished with you." I laughed, sharp and cutting. "Of course you aren't. You can't help but want me. I'm the most despicable mage you'll ever meet. Enjoy the pain, Penny." Revel in it, I brushed past her to my door. My hand was shaking as I unlocked it. She yanked on my shoulder, spinning me around. Her arms were crossed as she glared at me, her eyes growing darker, her lips pulled back in a delicious snarl that showed the sharpness of her teeth. "Explain to me about the Cray attack. What are you doing to fight the deception sorcerer who is messing with you? What can you do against a mage like that? What can I expect from him in the future? Is everyone at risk who I come in contact with? Can I marry a mage in good conscience if this monster is going to ruin whoever I touch?" I stared at her. I'd avoided having this conversation, but she needed reassurance so that she could marry a different mage. "Zach." It took me a moment, but I finally managed to summon the appropriate snarl. "Marry whomever you like. That's interesting. You've never shown any interest in the deception mage before now. All those Cray attacks and not a word of concern, but now suddenly you care." "We should have this conversation in private." She glanced around like the walls had ears. Maybe they did, but having Penny alone in my room was out of the question. Then again, she didn't look like she was going anywhere. I threw open my door and bowed elaborately, texting Zach while she walked in. She smelled so lovely. When I saw the title on the spine of her book, Marriage Contracts Made Unbreakable, I wanted to rip it apart. Instead, I headed for my bar and poured myself a drink. I swallowed it in one gulp, then poured another before I could give Penny a charming and indifferent sneer. "You were saying?" "Pitch isn't something I can talk about openly. You know about everything, so we should discuss what this monster wants with her. Do you know? What would a monster do with a Penny Lane? Perhaps it's your herders. Who doesn't want heart shrapnel when you really want to leave an impression on the enemy? I can't think of a single reason a truly diabolical mage would want you." She narrowed her eyes and took a threatening step towards me. Was she going to hurt me? That would be so pleasant. "Why won't you tell me? Am I just too stupid, little macaroon for brains Penny Lane who can't think two thoughts together? I know he messed with my mind. I know I have gaps where I used to have memories, but I want to know as much as I can know. I need to. I'm vulnerable, Drake. I'm vulnerable and I need to know what my limitations actually are so I don't accidentally get myself killed or kidnapped by some psycho mage. I have enough of them in my life. I don't need any more." Her chest rose and fell. Her shirt was barely attached at the sides and back. It would be so easy to finish the job. The curve of her waist, the way her bottom lip trembled, the bed at the top of the short stairs, the couch, the coffee table, the door. I took a step closer to her while green shimmered around me, green and gold that blended with her hair while I stopped breathing. I couldn't take another breath unless it was Penny Lane. I backed her against the door and pushed her hands above her head while I buried my face into her neck and inhaled and inhaled and inhaled. She struggled against me. Such a delicious struggle. I opened my mouth and touched my teeth to the skin of her neck. Ah! A shudder went through me at that contact, then a hard knocking reverberated through the door. It took me a few breaths to get it together enough to retract my claws and pull away from Penny. I pushed her to the side and opened the door. "Zachary Stoneborough, looking for your witch?" She came within a hair's breadth of being eaten by a dragon. Keep a closer watch on that one. She doesn't know when to run away. She glared at me and then spun towards Zach. "Stay away from me, idiot mage. Just because I don't have magic doesn't make me a pet that you can pass around when you get tired of me." She pointed a sharp finger at me. "As long as we're bound together, we have to regularly interact. Try not to be such an idiot in 3 days when I contact you again." She shoved past Zach and stalked down the hall, clearly not wanting any mage company. Zach looked at her back, the pale skin showing beneath the fluttering white fabric of her shirt, what was left of the shirt. He cast a quick spell that glamored the shirt so no one else would see her like that, then walked past me towards my couch. He flopped down and ran his hands through his hair. "This isn't working. You mean that outfit? That's because you didn't wear a belt. Throws off the whole proportion. He laughed. Not you too. She's friend-zoned me. I thought she'd naturally kind of shift her affection to me once you dumped her, but she doesn't see any mages like that. Not even Ian. You know how witches are with him, but they're almost friends. Ian doesn't have witch friends, not just friends. It hasn't been very long. No, and it doesn't help that you're ripping her clothes off when you get the chance. She came to my room demanding that I tell her about the deception sorcerer. What does she remember? He blinked at me and frowned. I don't know. She said that she was scratched, a scratcher and a titch, but I don't know what that means, do you? I ran my hand through my hair again. If she remembers, that means she's liable to do something stupid. Do you think she'll go into Darkside even though she knows the danger? I think that she doesn't like a mage messing with her head or messing with her mage. I think she's going to do something brilliant that we could never see coming. I'm sure of it. You're her friend? Good. Be her best friend? I can't be that. I can't get close to her without wanting her skin in my teeth, under my nails. I've never hovered so close to the dark side as when anger sizzles over her skin. He nodded. Sure, I love Pitch. Always will. But Penny's too stupid to feel like that about. I'll just forget about the Pitch and be her idiot friend genius who needs her for some reason I'll try to come up with. We can marry for mutually beneficial purposes without all that emotional stuff that messed you up so good. Well, he grinned sharply. You're still messed up. What big eyes you have. What sharp teeth you have. All the better for biting Penny Lane. Maybe I should have told her about Sooth. It's not your place without permission from her legal guardian. Since he's the sorcerer who wants to rip you apart, that makes it a tad tricky. That's her Darkside guardian, not Dayside. That would be her mother. You think that she doesn't want to rip you apart after what you did to her daughter? That's optimistic. I slumped down on the couch next to him. I was so tired. Revere had built a time capsule around the house, and I'd been practicing spell work for days and days before he finally let me out. I had to put the time in somewhere. I closed my eyes and rubbed my eyebrows. Zach, I need to kill something. Not kill, shred to pieces, something beautiful. You have wars to fight in Darkside, don't you? The green mage hasn't been seen for ages. That's not what I wanted. I moved and had his throat in my claws before I knew what I was doing. This wasn't a good place for this battle. We rolled off the couch and into the barren wastes. He was going to die. Or at least burn and ache like I ached. He could touch Penny, I could not. He would feel pain for that, but not as much as me. Zach was tough, angry, an excellent opponent who took hours and hours to break. Finally, I stepped through side into my room and shook off the mostly disintegrated suit. What a waste of perfectly fine trousers. I went to the pile of dried blood and gems on my table and carried them to the sink to wash. I could magic them clean, but that would disrupt the sorcerer's spell. Hail. One more mysterious sorcerer who I needed to defeat. No. The sorcerer I needed to defeat was myself. I should not have let Penny into my room. I shouldn't have hurt Zach. I shouldn't have trusted Jasper to take my responsibility for me. I shouldn't do that now with my father. He was a mess, a broken mage. Revere was right. I couldn't let my issues get in the way of what must be. If I could control a great dragon and keep my sanity, I could certainly control my reaction around a female, even if she was perfection in a mustache, and a short skirt, and a ripped blouse. I sighed and stepped through side, coming back at Huntsman Manor. I stood in the hall with the marble floors beneath my still muddy and bloody boots before I slowly walked up the stairs, leaving a mess behind me. As I climbed, I spelled myself tidy, bit by bit ending with the mess on the floor until I reached the top and looked moderately pulled together, other than my face. It was hard to effectively glamour open wounds. I went to the table and sat down as though I'd never left. I didn't say anything to my father, and his pen never stopped scratching, but it wasn't quite as unbearable this time. Maybe because Penny had touched my chest with her delicious fingers. Maybe because I'd ripped apart Zachary. Maybe because I was too tired to be irritated by something as small as the way someone moved a pen over paper. Maybe because it didn't matter. I could not have her. But she would have me. I would keep her safe. I would become what she needed. That's what I needed. I was immersed in a vast contract that a mage family was trying to cancel without paying the ordinary penalties when my cell phone buzzed, and rang, and buzzed again. It was like the wedding. I pulled it out and saw a picture of a mouse in a top hat, eating a cookie. It was Pete. Did I mind if he taught Professor Cadaver some new tricks? I stood and stepped through side, coming out in Pete's room. I tucked the mouse carefully into his cage before I gripped Pete's shoulder and dragged him through side, then into the boys' gym. He attacked me first, apparently ready and waiting for the chance to be broken by me. He was going to make his mark, do his damage, and he did. It was ridiculously satisfying to see his improvement. He took some effort to break. He was worthy of the effort. By the time his teeth were stained pink from blood instead of fireballs, I was a mess, a genuine wreck. I laughed at Pete and choked off because it hurt so much. He staggered over and slapped me on the shoulder, almost sending me over sideways. "You don't look so good. Maybe you should take lessons sometime." I gripped his shoulder. "I have taken lessons from you. You're a good mage. Resilient." His eyes widened before he shrugged and stepped away from me. "Don't get all sentimental just because I bled on you. Anyway, this witch stuff, it'll all work out. You own each other. You can't walk away." I put my hand against my chest where it ached, where it would always ache whether I were bound to her or not. I can't, but I will anyway.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 4. I carefully packed the 3 finest balls in really cute boxes. My hacker friend had sworn that these were Dayside witches. We'd see. I scheduled my pickup with Signor and went down to the east side driveway. 4 a.m. He came an hour later. I stood and stretched, almost dropping my packages in the tome about marriage contracts. There were too many different kinds. I had to know specifically which kind my mother had had with my father to understand how it applied to me. Signor parked at the end of the drive and took his time getting out. He looked like rock, stone, impossible to move, even if he moved anyway. "Signore, will you take me home this morning? I need to be back before 8 tonight. I have an appointment." "Cara mia, I can. Is that all you have for me to deliver?" I held up the packages. 3 finest balls. "Not much, and for you, nothing but pain." His brow furrowed in the dim light of too early in the morning. "My pain or yours?" "Yours. I'm taking it. We can do that while you drive. I'm not broken today, so I don't need to lay around on your couch." "Pretty special, right?" I handed him the package and climbed up into the passenger seat. I didn't even glance into the back. Like I didn't care what magic he had. It wasn't any of my business. After he'd put away the herders, he sat down and started the engine. I ran my hands over his head, down his neck to his shoulder while I soaked up his pain. He didn't have as much today. "Have you been giving your pain to someone else? Oh, jealousy, how irrational you are." "No, cara mia. I heard the cray attacked and you were poisoned." I flinched and pulled my knees up, wrapping my arms around them and pulling them tighter to my chest. "Bitten. Is that the same as poisoned?" "Is that the same as poisoned?" "I don't think so. If Huntsman can't protect you, it's a good thing you won't be marrying him." "Who will you marry, Stoneborough?" I stared at him. "If I'm not safe, you'll kill me, right?" He glanced at me and shrugged. "Not with pleasure." "Whoa, that's nice." "I don't want you to kill me. The poisoning was terrible. I could feel myself dying so slowly, taking weeks at a time." "Do you always make it so horrible?" "I couldn't bring myself to kill you outright, but you proved more resilient than I'd thought. You should be dead." "Thanks. You are vulnerable without magic, but you're still a witch. You're still fairly indestructible. If I had to kill you, how would you like me to do it? Now, you're taking requests? Quickly, so I don't know that you betrayed me. Without pain. I don't want to feel the pain when I die. I feel the pain too much being alive. Death should be different. You say I'm a witch. Does that mean I don't have a soul? I want to go to heaven when I die. So I'm with the go to heaven when I die. So I'm with Lulu, my angel princess. She's so sweet. And all the animals poppy torched. Tea parties every day. A drop of human blood would give you a soul, Karamia. You can have your heaven. I grabbed his wrist and squeezed, digging my fingers into the nearly solid flesh. Thank you for not telling me that it's a fantasy. I need hope. Because you have a soul. Needing hope is proof of its existence. With hope, anything is possible. Isn't that how it goes? I sighed. I don't know. I've only gone to church a few times. I'm going on Sunday with Missy. Missy? A witch? A human. She was a Darksider's pet. Narcalo, do you know him? He slid his tongue over his teeth like he was tasting blood. I may. There are a great many Darksider mages who keep human pets. He glanced at me. Do you find it unethical? Some keep their pets very well. But they're still slaves, and it's against the law. He nodded and gave me a slight smile. You would liberate them all. It's a good thing you aren't in Darkside, Karamia. Mages would want to keep you as a pet. But I'm a witch, even without magic. He shrugged and turned back to the road. Indeed. I can't imagine a mage or a sorcerer who could enslave you without becoming more your slave in return. What about my father? I watched him carefully for a reaction, but he didn't so much as twitch. Of course not. Rocks don't twitch, particularly your father. I studied him, the assassin who might kill me if I got too close to my father. Did I have a lot of magic? He nodded, still staring at the road. So whoever stole my magic must have more than he needs. The need grows commensurate with the having. I have a lot of energy, but I don't need more. He glanced at me with a slight smile, because it was given, not taken. What does that mean? He shook his head and refocused on the road. You should go lie down. I've been spelling your curse, but it's about to consume you. He was right. 1 second I'm riding in a car like a normal person. The next my intestines were being trawled by sharks. On motorcycles, in leather jackets, which made no sense. But sense was a long ways away from the agonizing fear that spread through me, chewing all reason and spitting it out like used dental floss. I stumbled into the back and crashed on the couch while my body ached and my stomach twined. The curse. What a twisted mage my father must have been to put a curse like that on me. A carsick curse. So random. Jet sick, too. I was not meant to travel. Probably that was meant to keep me from running away, from living like we had before my mother called Revere, running from place to place, never staying longer than a few months, a few weeks, a few days. Yeah, my mother had taken the brunt of that curse. She couldn't even leave her house. She'd taken part of the curse for me. Why would she do that? She didn't love me, not really. She never had tea parties with me, just taught me how to fight, how to endure pain, how to endure pain, how to endure more pain. I smiled slightly as I stared at the ceiling of Signore's van. The nausea was already wearing off. I hadn't even thrown up. That was my mother showing love. My safety, my ability to fight and struggle in spite of difficulty, that was her gift to me, plus taking the brunt of the curse. Was there a curse mage at school I could get to help me with it? I could pay him in lollipops or something. It seemed like witches cursed much more often than mages. No, if there was some way to undo it. Revere already would have. He could do anything. I fell asleep for the rest of the drive, and when the truck stopped, I rolled off the couch, ducked through the front, patted Signor on the head, and jumped out. "Do you want me to wait for you?" he asked. This fancy assassin who probably had better things to do. "I'll text when I need you to pick me up. I'll probably have important things with me that shouldn't travel in a limo." He raised an eyebrow but only nodded and drove away. I didn't watch him go. I climbed the back steps and went into the old enclosed porch. A strange little man sat there knitting. I didn't bother him and he didn't look up at me. None of my business. I walked into the kitchen, saw how tidy it was, which meant there wasn't any food, and headed down into the dungeon. The dungeon was at the bottom of a very long flight of very well-lit stairs. The long hall was lit with bare bulbs, but the space was immaculate. One didn't want errant dust floating through a spell or getting meshed with a herder. I went to the herder room and pushed open the door. My mother was in the middle of a mess of herders, elastine turning brittle from laying out too long. I grabbed the rubber gloves interlined with lead and a pair of goggles, then went to work. She'd made a few interesting adjustments to her system. We worked in silence until the last herder was curing on its shelf before she took off her goggles and gloves, then stared at me like she'd just noticed me in spite of the hours we'd been working together. Was I like that with Zach and my chem girls? Probably. I'd have to work on it. "Hey, Mom." I got some memories back of Dad cursing me and stealing my magic. "Can I see your marriage contract?" Her eyes widened and went a little haunted before she turned and left the lab, climbing the stairs like she was tired. That had been a lot of herders. Maybe she was. She didn't have my nearly limitless amounts of energy, and she had my curse. I snarled at her, because if there was one thing I hated, it was owing someone something. If there was one thing I hated worse than that, it was owing my mother. She led me to the green and gold parlor. For a second, I couldn't breathe because Drake was so much in that room. His aura, his strength, his incredible aftershave. She pushed open the roll-top desk and started sorting through certificates and sheafs of papers clipped together. "Are those all Grandmama's contracts?" I asked. "Yes. These aren't all of them, just her favorites. The ones she was most pleased with." She searched the desk, checking each drawer before she found the folder and opened it to pull out one paper. She handed it to me, then grabbed my face, twisting my neck so I had to stare into her eyes. "Your memories came back? How?" I forced myself to breathe evenly and not yank my head out of her claw-like grasp. I was bitten by a titch and a scratcher decided I deserved 2 memories because my feet were so pretty. "What is a scratcher?" She studied me, her onyx eyes going even darker before she dropped my face and turned. "A getter. A betweener. Space-time dimensionality don't apply to scratchers. They aren't Darksiders. They are from somewhere else. Rare to have one of those involved. Extremely expensive. He must be getting desperate." She smiled. There wasn't anything more terrifying than my mother's smile. I smiled back. "I like that." She shrugged slightly. "He'll make a mistake. You must be married before you turn 18. Because of the curse?" She shrugged. "I can't give you my protection, blunting the curse's strength when you turn 18, but it's more. Legality. A mother's protection lasts until the child is 18, but a father's protection lasts until she is married." "All those Cray are still under their father's protection?" She shrugged. "Cray give up such ties, at least temporarily." "That's incredibly obnoxious. So, Darkside is just another patriarchy?" She laughed and patted my head. "You sound like Poppy. Funny girl, hating mages so much, but finding one so soon. Are you finished? I need to respell the desk." I shook my head and sat down. I stared at the paper, the contract. It was incredibly short and written in Darksider. I can't read this. She hissed and tapped the paper, sending strands of silver light over the page. The words shifted and flowed from the jagged symbols I couldn't understand to neat type. I, Serene, swear to live with Benjamin in Darkside and know no other. I will give him children he will raise as well as can be expected. I, Benjamin Sooth, swear to adore Serene Knight for the rest of my life, to love and protect as well as my children, as far as it is in my power. There were a couple of incredibly messy signatures, and that was it. It was the worst contract I'd ever seen. There were no clauses, no details, nothing other than a vague commitment from one witch to one mage to share one life forever. I squinted at it. There had to be more. My mom spoke in a soft voice. It's my mother. She was so talented at contracts that I created this to make her angry. She was angry, furious. Insisted my father write another contract to include some details. I don't know what happened to that one. I stared at that sheet of paper for a long time while my eyes got misty before I blinked back tears and turned to smile brightly at my mother. Wow. So I really did get the idiotic tendencies from you. Good to know. She sighed and pinched my ear, drawing blood. It didn't matter what the contract said. I would have signed anything he gave me. Why? He bespelled me. It's the mage energy. Aberrations don't have the natural defenses against mages that most witches have. We can manipulate their energy, but we pay for it in vulnerability. So you actually loved that monster? She stared at me with those unfathomable eyes. Love, hate, admire, despise. Revere is simple. Sooth is not. Sooth? Benjamin Sooth? Your father. You look like him. The hair. I will kill him someday. It's fated. I nodded. Cool. Before or after he takes me and does whatever he wants with me, what does he want with me? She smoothed her hand over my cheek, leaving a burning rush of agony. He will sell you to the highest bidder. An aberration without magic. You're worth worlds. Worlds? That's a lot. She nodded soberly. He will rule Darkside, then Dayside. Then on until he overreaches. So, he's a power mage. One whose priority is power instead of influence or knowledge. She nodded and frowned. I thought he was an influence mage because it seemed as though others changed their view for him, but he changed their views in spite of them, which isn't the same thing. Deception mages. Beautiful but so difficult. I nodded. So he just married you so he could have me and sell me to own worlds or whatever. Also steal my magic? She shook her head, a small frown on her face. No, I don't know what happened. One day he looked at me like I'd betrayed him and then we were at war. I don't know why. It could have been madness. Well, that sounds fun. What about Revere? Revere was before. He didn't want me, I suppose, like your dragon doesn't want you. Revere wanted you. A slight smile spread across her enchanting mouth. Literally enchanting. Revere couldn't help but want her. We had an alliance, nothing more. Until afterwards when I was stuck in Dayside. He'd thought I needed Darkside. I thought so too. I spread my fingers over a contract that was heavy enough to kill someone with. Not a mage. Such tough heads. Speaking of tough heads, Drake, my dragon. I couldn't breathe for a moment as my shoulder ached, but in the most agonizingly pleasant way. Maybe I should have stayed away last night until I figured out my next move, but I'd needed him and he'd needed me. The scent of him convinced me almost as much as him holding me against the door, breaking as I'd broken when I'd tied him to a tree. How could he want so much and take so little? Because he loved me, but didn't think he was what I needed. His ego must be suffering terribly. That was probably good for him. Maybe that nurtured the fragments of his soul. Why did Drake break the contract? Why did he leave me if he wanted me? I don't care about Darkside. His strength is there, Not Dayside. Not after Sooth broke his family. Daysider mages have a streak of honor that amuses Darksiders. Your dragon's honor runs deep. He lies to me, hurts me for no reason. Honor is a virtue. A mage cannot have very many of those. Make a seal mark on the desk when you are finished with her contracts. She left me, returning to her dungeon to work on who knew what. I had no magic, so why should I care? I went through the contracts, my grandmother's, but there were too many and the details were so precise. I went through the drawers and found a slim notebook that smelled like roses. Inside, I found notes on each contract she'd kept. The key, perfect. I heard a rumbling of an engine and pulled together all the contracts along with the notebook, sealed the empty desk closed, and hauled my stash outside. The knitting man was still there. I went outside and Signor was waiting for me, but Teddy was with him. I stared at Teddy. He winked at me. I turned to glare at Signore. What is this? You know that strangers aren't allowed here. Signora shrugged. Your appointment was with this mage. Yes, you may have your study session in the back while I drive. I frowned at Signore. He frowned back. He wasn't budging on this. Why in the world not? I shifted my glare to Teddy. He was so beautiful. The scent of black licorice stirred in the air between us as I stepped towards him. This house is not a place for visitors. Revere will rip you to pieces that no one will ever find if you come back here or share its location with another. He cocked his head and brushed my cheek with his fingers. Not fingers. Claws. Black claws. Black claws, the scent of him changed, black licorice and ashes. Fire dragon. What Jello knows, Princess knows. Once Drake came here, showed you his dragon. Well, it opened the door to so many skeletons. This house isn't unfindable, not anymore. I pulled away from him, heart pounding in my chest. I glanced back at the house, at the small man with the knitting needles. He smiled at me. No, that wasn't a smile. And it wasn't me he was showing his teeth to. He was some kind of guard. I rubbed my forehead for a minute before I shrugged and stepped past the two mages to climb into the truck. I went into the back, stuck my grandmama's contracts under the couch, and then went to the bar. I almost poured a glass of honey liquor for Teddy, but as much as I'd like to poke holes in the mage, I had business to do. Deadly Morsel, Chapter 5. I sat down with 2 glasses, both for him, and waited for him to sit next to me. I opened the book and asked him to explain the points that weren't clear. He did. He didn't waste time, but my skin was crawling by the time I'd gotten back to Rosewood. The way he looked at me was so very appraising. We're here, Signor announced, coming back to loom over Teddy. I hope your business is finished. It's not, I said as I fished under the couch for the contracts and the slim notebook. We're going to finish up in my room. Teddy smiled at Signore, the kind of smile that had 5 different kinds of devils in it. Signora's face went impassive. This isn't a good sort of mage to have in your bedroom. Teddy, are you a seducer like Ian? No. I'm a killer like Signore. You love mages like me. You can't deny it. You like all kinds of mages, I think. Such an interesting witch. If you go with Penny, consider yourself uninvited from my next excursion, Signore said dryly. Teddy's smile grew slightly more diabolical and beautiful, which didn't seem possible, acknowledged. He turned and left, and I followed, not looking at Signore. He didn't want me dealing with Teddy without him. I could give Signore some kind of credit and claim it was for my protection. But he was the mage who had poisoned me, who would still kill me if it looked like I was going to fall into my father's hands. I couldn't trust him any more than I could trust any other mage. Are we doing this just to irritate him? Eddie asked once we were down the alley away from the truck. Basically. Also, why did you tell me you were a dragon? I glanced over at him. He was so beautiful, skin like polished pearls, eyes twinkling like my mother's, lips soft and sweet like death. He would deliver sweet death. I spun around to face him. If someone has to kill me, I'd rather you do it instead of Signor. Do you mind? His smile broadened. I don't mind, but I think he would. I don't think it would be good for him to kill me. It would hurt him. And you'd rather it hurt me? I don't think it would. You don't love me. He raised his eyebrows. Signor loves you? I shrugged and continued walking. I think I'm his pet. He thinks I'm his pet anyway. Darksiders. So idiotic. What were your parents like? I mean, their marriage contract. He went quiet and stopped walking. He turned to face me, eyes cold and empty. They have a weird, happy relationship. Sick and twisted, but genuinely happy. I have 5 siblings. My dad is a merce general in Huntsman. At least he used to be before he refused to swear fealty. Now he's just a grunt. He has more vacation days. My mother likes that. I frowned at him. Your dad works for Drake. That seems so strange. I thought you were a prissy, rich brat. He laughed, showing his teeth. Thank you. I'll take that as an insult. No, I'm a poor, poor prince of a mage. Does that make me even more attractive to you? It does. You are amusing. He took a step closer and brushed my hair with his fingers. I jerked my head back. What are you doing? You are considering a marriage contract with a mage. Stoneborough, probably, but there are other mages. I promise not to make you love me. You wouldn't get such an offer from Stoneborough. How would you prevent it? I'm naturally disposed to love the worst mages. He laughed, a sound like a knife, sinking through my skin. I could spell you against it. I would teach you to kill. We would spend nights in a whirlwind of blood and pain. It would be very profitable, even the ruby would tremble at your name. Penny, I said in an ominous, breathy voice. He laughed, this time sounding more normal, human. If you'd like, pitch has more of a ring to it. No, Penny has rings, pitch has pain. You're mixing up your witches. You shouldn't do that. He stepped closer, his fingers sliding along my arm, and the sensation like cutting. Like I was cutting him, the pleasure of hurting another before empathy cut me back. How did he do that? Darkness grew inside of me, spiraling and spinning, a bit like flying through the night, wrapped in a tourney cloak. His touch spread through me along with the darkness, a wind of death and pain and beauty that love could never touch. I screamed as a different pain ripped through my shoulder. I smelled Signor, but I didn't see him. I couldn't see anything for a moment in the darkness that swirled beneath the walkway in front of Lilac Stories. Teddy. What was he that he could do that to me? Eclipse the penny and release the pitch, not just the pitch. The witch inside of me. Signora's beautiful, glittering ruby sword was at Teddy's throat as he raised his face from my shoulder, my blood on his chin. He spoke with a guttural accent. Death or dark side, death or dark side, step through or die. Teddy glanced at me, winked, then stepped through side. Darkness drifted around us like ashes while Signor picked me up in his iron arms. Cara mia, you are bleeding. Your blood is on my tongue. Tell me to take you to your room. I couldn't feel my tongue. My shoulder was bleeding heavily, and I felt like I had more holes, other places dripping and dripping and dripping and dripping. My room, I said. I'd meant to say that, but it was more of a breath, more of a sigh. Lilac Stories was so ugly. I needed black. I needed pain. I needed death and never love again. Signor pounded on Zach's door. the movement shaking me against him. So many rocks. It took a minute before Zack opened the door. Signore shoved me at him and said, the death mage Prince of Blackheart touched her, "Bring back the penny. You won't mind pitch staining your fingers." Pitch. Zack. My mage. Zack's eyes were bright blue and burning as he gripped my hip, burying his fingers in my skin, razors, needles, pain, 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 as though I belonged to him or something. I hissed and slid out of his arms, smoke and ash, before I took his wrist and crushed it. I crushed and crushed while he snarled at me, rolling me under him while he gripped my hip. I pressed my arm against his throat and lunged, ripping through his jaw with my teeth. Pain, his pain, filled me with this drowning happiness that echoed in my laugh. Blood, pain, pitch black, and then nothing. I woke up broken. Light came from far away, flickering like an old film projector we had in the dungeon. Poppy spinning in the attic, grinning at me, then throwing the match that lit my happy mouse family in a conflagration. I'd ripped her face off for that, made her smile from ear to ear. That had hurt. Me. Also Poppy. A tea party in the tree at midnight, the moon above us and the shadowy ground below. Poppy toasting to me and then telling me she was fighting without me. She didn't need me. I'd shattered my teacup against her face and then shattered her. That had hurt. Not as much as her leaving. Poppy in the tourney, whirling around in her white cloak, whirling and whirling while I threw the herder that would consume her, eat her away with acid she wasn't prepared for. That had hurt her. But she liked that. She'd smiled at me. She'd always liked playing with pitch. Poppy, I'm sorry. What is wrong with you, Teddy Blackheart? I know you're stupid, but Theodore Prince? I pried my swollen eyes open and saw Zack over me. His face livid, eyes bright blue and burning, his shattered face. I'd broken him beautifully. The dark blue shone through, his real face, the cutting cheekbones and harsh mouth. The mage. I smiled and slid my fingers over the broken, jagged edges I'd given him. That's how my face looked. My teeth had torn chunks in his jaw. Ow! Yep, I could feel that. You are the prettiest broken thing I've ever seen. Do I look so nice ripped apart? He scowled at me. No, you look terrible. Sickeningly terrible. I sighed and pulled the pain out of him. It came fast, a flood of agony that lasted until Zack caught my wrists and pushed my hands against his bed. You did not just heal me. What is your problem? You fixed my wrist. Who is going to fix yours? I'm not. I'm not going to fix you after you let that sickening snake into your bed. Bed? What bed? You mean Signore's couch? He hissed at me. It was such a cute little mage hiss. I smiled and would have touched his mouth if he wasn't still holding me down. He was in your room. I was going to take him to my room, but we didn't get that far. He promised me so many things, Zack. He promised that I would never love him. He promised me pain, death, darkness. I sighed as the memory swirled around me. Pitch liked it. I liked it. Let's face it. I'm an idiot. The fact that Drake and you haven't completely ripped me apart has nothing to do with me. I didn't think Teddy would do anything, though. I thought he was Drake's mage. You aren't Drake's witch. You aren't anyone's witch, not yet. You are vulnerable, Penny. You have no idea the things I could have done after you passed out in my room. I raised my eyebrows. Ow, I really had to find someone to heal me at some point. Maybe Drake. He wasn't the best healer. But he wasn't the best healer, but he was the best mage. Or the worst one. Whatever. I tried to sit up. but Zach held me down like I was seriously going to run off or something. It took too much effort to do anything. Even looking at him took effort. I passed out instead. The next time I came to. He was on his phone, muttering something about idiot witches. He threw the phone against the wall and came back to the bed. He still looked like Peter Pan. Had I broken his glamour? You're awake. How do you feel? I'm still pissed, but I'm going to heal you anyway. You're welcome. I am so nice to you, mostly because you still need to do the tech suit, and I need someone to hand me screwdrivers when I'm working on Rosie. That's the car's name, Rosie. I named it so you don't get to. It isn't a stupid name either. It's a good name. Sophisticated. Way better than Pitch. I tried to sit up and succeeded in going up on my elbows. Way better. Rosie is an adorable name. Why are you so pissed? Don't you like it when Pitch rips you apart? That wasn't Pitch. That was a corrupt penny. But no, that's not the infuriating thing. What I'm upset about is the fact that now I owe your diabolical Darksider deliverman for bringing my witch to me when another mage tried to seduce her to the dark side, like the literal dark side, which would certainly kill you. I frowned at him. Wait, you owe Signor? That makes no sense. Didn't he take you away from Teddy? Yes. But he bit me. I put my hand on my shoulder. It was still tender, but there wasn't any blood or open wound. Did you heal me? I did. While I was ripping apart your face with my teeth. Yep. That's kind of talented. I'm impressed, Zach. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, I've got skills. What will he want? Tech. A delivery deal? What? I shook my head. No, you aren't giving Signor anything. He saved me. Not for you, for him. You aren't his witch. No, but we have an alliance. It's unspoken, but it's there. He scowled at me and folded his arms across his chest. What kind of alliance? I take his pain and he's nice to me. He stared at me. He's nice to you. What does that even mean? He says nice things. He gives me hugs. It sounds stupid, I know, but I need that. I need niceness. He ran a hand through his hair and closed his eyes tight. You take his pain, like heal him? Sort of. His pain is very deep. Not just pain, emotions too. Madness? I shrugged. Probably. I can take almost anything. He stared at me for a long time. Anything. Pain, anger, fear, desperation, hunger, need. That kind of thing. Only mages. I can't touch a witch's pain. Too bad. I probably could have fixed my mother a long time ago. You cure his madness, and in return he's nice to you. Huh. I shrugged. It's unusual, I know, but it's worked for a long time. He also delivers my packages. But your buyers pay for that. True. Unbelievable. It's not exactly hard to be nice to you, Penny. I frowned at him. You haven't been nice to me since you found out I was Pitch. He stared back for a really, really long time. I can be nice to you. I know. You were at the beginning. It's hard when I know you're Pitch because you just ripped my face off. You didn't want niceness. I need it. I need love. Human stuff, hugs and jokes and holding hands and saying nice things, even when I'm ripping off faces. I sighed and traced the mess of my cheek. Were you serious about healing me because I'm about to pass out again? I really messed up your wrist. He came over, arms still crossed before he rolled his eyes and plopped down on the bed next to me. He propped his head on one hand and started tracing over my face, sending pulses of blue light through my skin. It felt tingly, warm, nice. He moved his hand over my shoulder, my arm, wrist, and down to settle over my ribs. I curled against him until his warmth soaked into my back. The curse, that's where it lived. Tell me a story, Zach. There are so many things I'm not saying. A story. Once there was a tricked-out neutralizer with dial codes and muttly shot options with a glazed overlay that had an invisible setting. Wow, you really suck at stories. Keep going. He sent a wave of pleasant healing through me, and I could feel my cheek grow smooth, one layer at a time. One day, a boy with a big nose picked it up and shot his older brother's duck with it. What setting? Stun. That's good. Right? But the brother didn't know it was stun setting, and so I fell asleep, for real, to the sound of Zach's voice, the pleasant blue pulse and the warmth against my spine. Signor, I owed him for rescuing me from Teddy, from Pitch, from the dark side in me, and Zach. He'd brought me back to Penny even though he loved Pitch. That meant something, but I wasn't sure what. Deadly Morsel, Chapter 6. The next morning I woke up wrapped in Zach's arms. It felt like Poppy, like home but weird at the same time. I kind of dozed back to sleep when frantic pounding started on the door. Viney was screaming. I sat up and Zach growled and tugged me back down. I elbowed him and rolled off the bed. Seriously, I was not his puppy. Sort of. I went to the door and opened it. Viney's face was white, her mouth open when she stared at me, opening and closing like a fish out of water. Are you okay? Are you sleeping with Zach? I stared at her for a long time. I guess. We just passed out drunk, Zach said, coming over to grab the doorframe and stare out at Viney. We're just friends. I'm her nice friend. He nudged me with his elbow. Right. Super nice. Super friends. Why are you freaking out? She grabbed my arm and yanked me towards my room. The door was open, and when I stepped in, it was like the last time Zach had blown off my door, but this time it was the window. There was no window. Scorch marks were all around it. I went over and sniffed. Carbon nitrate, Zach and I said at the same time before we exchanged glances. Where's Senior? Senior? I stared at the hook where his cage should be, but no cage, no weasel, just a black card hung from the hook where I kept it. I reached for it, but Viney gripped my hand and yanked it away. Evidence! Don't tamper with evidence, I called Drake. He should be here soon. I elbowed her hard and grabbed the card anyway. A spell hit me once I touched the paper, and the scent of black licorice swelled around me like a heavy fog. I stumbled into the wall before Zach pulled me against him, his hand around my waist. Are you okay? Sometimes you're really stupid. In a really cute way, of course. He snorted, and I tried not to throw up. I ran to my bathroom and puked for a long time. Teddy had Senior. I was going to kill him. What if this was all an elaborate trap of sooths? I gripped the edge of the ceramic sink, clawing my nails into the edge over and over while I stared at myself in the mirror. No, I wasn't looking at myself. Maybe I should. I blinked at my reflection. I looked terrible. My clothes were ripped and blood-stained. That's how Pitch and my witch liked to play. Teddy would regret this game when I was finished with him. My mouth watered as I thought of his blood. I licked my lips and shook my head. Drake's coming, I told myself. Drake. I put my hand on my shoulder. The one that Signor hadn't bitten this time. What was up with him biting me? He was like Senior, only with sharper teeth. I had to get my sweet little darling back before Teddy ripped him apart. Teddy was Drake's friend. Maybe Drake could get him for me. He loved me but didn't want me. He loved me but didn't want me. How could I possibly convince Drake to help me? It would start with me not looking like I'd enjoyed rolling around with Zach. I bit my bottom lip. Had I? Not like that. I washed my face and started on my makeup. I had my robe in the bathroom. I washed the blood off my hands and throat, then pulled on the robe over my underwear. Did I look nice? Like Drake might like? Not that it would make a difference. I'd look so nice on our wedding day. My heart ached and throbbed with a mixture of sorrow and anger that I didn't need. I took one last look in the mirror before I went into my room. It was empty except for Ian, who leaned against the wall next to the blown-up window. Ian. I swallowed as I stared at the golden mage. After my last encounter with a dragon mage, I wasn't about to underestimate him. Mistress, he smiled, golden and dangerous, but not flirty. Can you not call me that? Is that an order? No, just a request. In that case, no. He smiled a little bit wider. Are you all right? We'll get him back. Teddy's not going to rip apart your pet. How do you know? He shrugged. He's playing a game. If he starts killing sweet animals, he'll suffer the consequences. What consequences? He straightened up. I know it's hard to believe, but Drake and I are something of a power couple. Throw in Stoneborough, and you've got yourself a nice little team of defenders. Besides that, this entire thing is a school rivalry. You didn't read the note, did you? Your pet is being held for ransom. Blackheart is challenging our school to a tournament. Winner gets the Rosewood mascot. I wrinkled my nose and took a step away from him. Senor is a personal pet, not a school mascot. You're the mascot. Your weasel is just what they took when they didn't find you. It's almost a good thing that you spent the night with Zach. Drake's in the commons with all the other power players. What about you? He laughed. Everyone knows that I'm only good for one thing. If there are Blackheart witches to seduce, they'll let me know. I grabbed his forearm. The bond didn't throb very much. I could barely feel it, but there was still aching in him. I took that. Teddy showed me his claws. I appreciate your restraint with me. I know that you could seduce me if you wanted to. He raised his eyebrows and studied me for a long time before he nodded. You're welcome. I'm only the third worst mage. I can have pity on a witch who is in love with my best friend. It's for Drake. Though not you. I nodded and crossed my arms. That's why I trust it. I didn't think that Teddy would seduce me either. Ian raised an eyebrow. Did he try to seduce our sweet Penny? How did you resist? I didn't. Signor rescued me. He nodded. Teddy is very beautiful. I smiled brightly. Terrifyingly so. I headed into the commons room where students were crowded in and overflowing into the hall. Someone blew off her door again, didn't they? The students parted to reveal Wit, sexy in some kind of peacock blue silk pajamas, lace insert up top while billowy pants swirled around her legs. Her hair gloriously mussed in a calculating way. She glanced over at Drake, where he stood next to the hideous amethyst fireplace. I pressed my nails into my palms. Her mussed and rumpled look was so much better than mine. Blackheart, Viney said, all raccoon-eyed, glaring at Wit. Probably for being in her domain. Blackheart. Blackheart was going to die. All of them, any of them, I wasn't particular. I stood in the middle of the room, clenching and unclenching my fists, while Professor Vale sent all the kids to their rooms, leaving only a few grim faces in the common room. I ran my fingernails lightly up and down my arms while I tried to think. They had Signor Mort. They would pay in blood and pain and agony. Apparently, thinking wasn't going to happen, not while I was still freaking out. Viney put her arm around my shoulder and pulled me to the couch. She pushed me down, next to Zach. He handed me a mug of hot chocolate with pink marshmallows and sprinkles. I sniffed, and everything got blurry when I saw the floating lumps of pink sweetness. Zach was my pink marshmallow. Too bad I kind of hated marshmallow. Drake cleared his throat. He wasn't standing like the chemistry captain, no, he was lounging in a chair with his hands steepled in front of him. But everyone turned to him, maybe 15 people, male and female, who were in various positions of awesomeness at school, a lot of them extremely well-groomed. But a few not so smooth and sleek as well. In fact, the girl with glasses in my English class stood in penguin pajamas, looking adorably messy while Lester leaned against the wall, giving the room his sexy smolder. "Have we gotten a message yet?" Drake asked. Viney's phone beeped, and she pulled it out, looking cool and edgy in her black tank, flaming skull bottoms and authentically smeared eyeliner. She scowled at Oscar, who was wearing a matching outfit minus the flaming skulls and liner. Ian stood beside Drake, shirtless, in golden silk bottoms that went with the rest of him. Even Ian without a shirt couldn't keep my gaze from drifting towards Drake with his must-red hair, intense green eyes, soft lips, hard cheekbones, strong jaw. He wore black and looked pale in contrast. Patrice sent this. I'll put it up on the screen. Viney pushed a bunch of buttons, and then our TV showed a message, Blackheart Challenge for Rosewood mascot. Free for all, winner takes all. March 4th in the Sullup Swamps. How many contestants? Oscar's voice was quiet, but it didn't have to be loud. He had a lot of charisma, maybe even more than Drake. Free for all. All. They want to play their whole school against ours. Drake's voice wasn't particularly soft or hard or interested, but everyone looked at him, including me. He didn't look up at me, still staring at his hands like they were the most interesting things. Zach leaned back, suddenly making my chocolate slosh. They'll win. Drake looked up at Zach with a fierce grin. So we cheat. I grabbed Zach's arm. Wait, why will they win? Oscar cleared his throat. Blackheart are better fighters overall, better chemists too. Viney glared at him, something cold in her eyes. Then why did you come to Rosewood? He almost smiled. Rosewood has certain advantages. I personally always wanted to be a ballerina. Ballerinas are sexy. I nodded at him, then frowned. Seriously, you're just agreeing that they're all better fighters than you. Wit sneered at me. Poor Penny, so confused at how things work in this world. Drake's family owns most of the best fighters who graduate from Blackheart. He'll have to recruit this spring, like he does every year. Being the best fighters doesn't mean much when you can't afford groceries. If we used the total resources of Rosewood against Blackheart, there wouldn't be a Blackheart after we were finished. Of course, then Huntsman couldn't recruit any mercenaries. We can't let some silly little school rivalry get in the way of what really matters. Ian cleared his throat. Little school rivalries have a way of spilling over into reality. Wit, we can't let this challenge go without making certain that we decimate them. Zach smiled, and there was that look in his eyes, the wild, fierce one that came before something weird. Decimation isn't a problem. Viney made a face at him. We don't want to leave the swamp scattered with body parts. Sorry, Zach. Setup would be a problem. Oscar's voice was precise. The swamps are too deadly all on their own that it will put Rosewood and Blackheart on even ground, and that puts Rosewood behind. Can we fly hot air balloons over the swamp and drop herders on them? You know, non-lethal ones. I peered over my mug at Drake, but he didn't answer my question. Instead, Wit did. Oh, I loved her so much. She laughed like I'd suggested that we piss on them while we were at it, which some people might get into. Not me. Penny, honestly, do you know how difficult it is to control balloons? It's not like we have a mage who can control the weather. I glanced over at Drake because I clearly remembered the way that he'd manipulated the wind and the water. He didn't look up from his hands, and Zach, when I glanced at him, winked at me. Viney looked at Wit. and they exchanged glances of contempt and mutual dislike. I think it would be a good idea to keep Penny in a balloon away from the fighting. She's the one they want. Wit inhaled sharply. I have a crazy idea. How about we let them have her? Ian didn't look at her and sounded bored. Blackheart stole from Rosewood. We can't let that go. We can't let that go. We'd go after them if they stole one of your pairs of shoes. It's a great opportunity to show Blackheart once and for all who is better. I raised my hand above my mug. But why would you want to show everyone that they're better? Everyone sighed while Zack laughed, and Drake looked up at me. Finally, his eyes glimmering with something. Rage, humor, irritation. I didn't know. I should know. I slid my hand beneath my robe over my shoulder and scraped my nails over his initials. He felt so many things, but the overwhelming thing was me in nothing but a robe with my long legs curled up around a cup of hot chocolate. Desire, ravenous, heart-thumping desire. He looked away from me, and I took a deep sip of hot chocolate, staring at the melting pink circles where marshmallows used to be. The rest of the meeting went on in a buzz around me, but to me the only point of interest was Drake, sitting so close but not close enough. Finally, everyone left with the plan to make a plan, leaving me with Zack and Viney. I closed my eyes and leaned back, hanging onto my mug. Penny Lane. Professor Vale's voice was sharp and impossible to ignore. You'll move into the usual room while your window is repaired. Without Senior Mort.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 7. Chromium Magnesium, Zinc and Manganese. Bromium. You're worrying the other students, Lars said in his low voice from his position at the end of the table holding a hose and 2 different vials in case of different accidents I might cause. I slammed the beaker closed and slid it hard over the surface to him. He palmed it easily with his enormous hand, tucking it away. Blackheart wants to die. I don't have time for games right now. My hands shook as I slid my palms over the counter. I was planning presentation, attack, defense for the idiotic swamp battle, but what I needed to do was kill Teddy. Kill. Dead, dead, dead. He'd seduced my witch. I hadn't married her, but my initials were carved into her. As long as I held her bond, she belonged to me, and Teddy knew that perfectly well. So well. I straightened up and ran a hand through my hair. My scalp burned because I'd forgotten to wash my hands. I spelled my head quickly using a neutralizer spell Revere had drilled into me. Revere. I was meeting him tonight in Darkside. He'd specified what I should wear, and it wasn't bedazzled. Business clothes for a board meeting in Darkside? I would never get the scent out. Not naturally, anyway. I wouldn't really wear a business suit. I wasn't going to take off the coat Penny had made for me out of witch hair and mage cloaks. I'd spell it into a business suit. No, he'd been specific. I sighed. That meant I'd have to go to Huntsman Manor, probably have a nice chat with my father before I got my suit. Maybe he wouldn't talk. I had to get moving. Lars, clean up this mess for me, will you? He nodded his ponderous head, eyes bright with malicious intelligence. Of course, I don't particularly want the school exploded today. How convenient. I stepped through side onto an icy plain, then back into Huntsman Manor's front hall, my lungs still a bit frozen as I walked up the steps towards my room. My footsteps echoed loudly, like the house was empty, but when I got to the top I heard my father's voice from the study. Drake, come in. We have a visitor. I took a deep breath before I headed into the study. I had a mostly indifferent expression on my face that didn't change even when I saw the fabulously dressed witch sitting with my father. Marissa Penmore, Whitley's mother. What an enchanting vision, I said with a smirk that would have made Ian proud. If there are any services I can offer, please let me know. She smiled at me, a smile that sent a drop of sweat down my back. Little huntsman. How is Whitley behaving in school? Badly, I hope. atrociously. You have every reason to be proud. Father, was there something you wanted? My dad raised his eyebrows. We were talking about this latest Blackheart hoopla. Are you going to let them win? I went to pour myself a drink. It's been universally acknowledged that wouldn't be in the best interest of the first families. And you're included in that category, Madame Penmore said with a bland smile. Me, I raised my eyebrows. Certainly not. I only represent those above me in absolutely every way. I live to fulfill their desires. There have been many questions about Huntsman Inc., and not only Dayside business. You're requiring your men to swear fealty to you personally. Not a lot of Blackheart alumni will be willing to accept such a requirement. I can't believe many Darkside mages are willing either. It's appalling. I have to serve these incompetent mercenaries like some old-fashioned feudal lord. All because of this mess with the deception mage, you know, the one who keeps attacking Rosewood. You're lucky that he targeted Huntsman rather than Penmore. But of course, we are the premier Dayside family. I should say were. I winked at her and took a healthy sip of my drink. Talking to her reminded me how much I despised witches. Indeed. Your family's humiliation has saved that of others. That must be some consolation to you. Has Huntsman considered marriage to allay your family's misfortune? She took a sip of her drink so she wasn't looking while I choked on mine. I turned to my father and he gave me a bland smile. He wasn't drinking. He was fiddling with a pen, moving it through his fingers in an endless stream of gold as he struggled with his own dislike for the witch. What do you think, Dad? Would you like to tie the knot with a lovely witch of fortunate circumstances? He shot me a sudden smile that made his eyes twinkle. Tying knots is something I've done a great deal in the last few years. Boating, you know, he said, turning to give Marissa a self-deprecating smile. I'm afraid neither my son nor I are particularly interested in being the premier family. It wasn't destined to last, not when the top is always the first target. That we've lasted for generations just shows how serene the mage world has been for the past few hundred years. Which world? She said with a tight smile. Just so my father leaned closer to the witch, showing concern that he couldn't possibly feel. It seems it's the beginning of a new period of unrest that flows from Darkside into our world, witch and mage. Perhaps we should consider uniting outside of marriage bonds with all the families in Dayside. Premier or not, he stood and gave her a bland smile. I'm so delighted you were able to drop by. You must understand that we have a great deal of work to do. Please feel free to come any time. And leave now. Out. She took her time, standing and adjusting her black leather jacket that clung to her curves just so, before she turned and headed out of the study in her extremely high spiked boots. She click-clacked, hips swaying beneath the fall of her dark hair. I glanced at my father to see if he was appreciating her well-choreographed exit, but he was already staring off into space, the pen moving faster in his fingers, a streak of gold that would melt in his hand if he wasn't careful. I have a meeting tonight, I said. He nodded and moved to the table, sitting down to continue where he'd left off before he'd been interrupted. He hadn't really been present during that entire visit, his mind on numbers and margins. He was an excellent business mage. The best. I took a step away from him. Really? Better than Jasper? Jasper was more well-rounded, but for straight diabolical business magery, my father was second to none. Was that pride I felt? I'd been determined to be exactly like him when I was little. And look at me, shattered by a witch I'd lost, just like him. I spun on my heel and stalked out. I found the crispest business suit I had, dressed carefully with my diamond cufflinks and bothered to put in a diamond earring and arrange my hair just so. I hadn't worried about personal appearance so much for a long time. I sort of tried with Penny, but she was always delighted by the things that took a different kind of effort, like training a mouse. I should be glad that she was getting closer to Zach, spending the night in his room. Even if I was perfectly aware that she was actually sleeping, it still infuriated me, and him giving her hot chocolate with marshmallows. She didn't like marshmallows. He wasn't the right mage for her. Not that Teddy would be any better. No, I would not allow Teddy to touch her. Zach was infinitely better than Teddy. If she needed a mage that would ruin her, I was her best option. Her only option. I stepped through side and came out in a star courtyard where Revere waited. He stood in the center dressed in the black of a Darksider. He looked like a Darksider in every way, disreputable, unkempt, coat jagged-hemmed, slouched dragon leather hat crookedly perched on his head, his eyes chips of pain in his pale, ugly face. That was a good glamour. Not only ugly and different, so that my eyes slid off his face and I was left with an impression but not an actual memory. Should I wear such a face, I asked, walking over to him. He handed me a briefcase that I hadn't noticed until I had it in my arms. You are representing Huntsman. Wear that, the arrogant, idiotic, pretty prince. I sniffed and adjusted my cuffs while holding the heavy briefcase. I thought you were going to give me a challenge, not make me go all natural. Where are we? Deadside. Border between dead and red. The sorcerer's name is Hale. You're here to collect some debts. Collecting debts in this suit? Collecting debts takes leather. Lots of leather in an army, particularly from a sorcerer. Not his debts. Ah! Revere stared at me, daring me to ask another stupid question. I had so many of those, but I resisted the impulse. Shall we? He finally asked with the barest gesture towards the massive gates before us. Am I supposed to say something bright without a script, or just prove I'm an idiot? I suppose that's always the wiser option. He smiled blandly and stepped across the square and towards an enormous gate with a nice H twined in metal across the front. That lettering was interesting. It was a human letter. To a Darksider uninitiated with Dayside, it would look like a vague swirl. That meant this family probably had a fair amount of Dayside connections. Dangerous. I walked up to the gate and knocked. A spark of gold swept over the bars, leaving me with a feeling of ick in my fingertips. I rubbed them together absently while the gate swung open. The walk to the house passed in a blur as Revere moved space and time for us. He had the most interesting spells. Dead. I'd like you to teach me that. Come by the house tomorrow. If you aren't dead tonight. I glanced at him and my eyes slid off his face. Such a good glamour. I'd like you to teach me that too. He smiled for a second, sharp before we reached the broad steps that rose before us, on and on seemingly eternally. The steps passed the same as the walkway, and we were soon on the narrow stoop in front of the massive door. The house seemed to growl at us as it crouched its massive scaly body waiting to pounce. Incredibly charming abode. Maybe I should build a summer home here. The world of Deadside and Redside were so evocative, and the opposite of charming Deadside housing the necromancers and being a mostly sparse desert. Redside being all red rocks, home of the massive Cray fortress I'd infiltrated with Signor not so long before. Now I was here with Revere. What was wrong with me, associating with wise mages like they had something to do with me? Revere knocked lightly on the door. The echoing sound didn't quite match. That was probably normal in Darkside. I didn't knock on a lot of doors. It opened without a creak in a surprisingly short amount of time, and a person peered out. Human. She was vacant-eyed but gave us a nice smile as she said, "Are you here for dinner?" Would we be eating you or would you be eating us? No, I'm actually here to discuss finances, money, business. Is the sorcerer available? She frowned. The sorcerer? Oh, you mean Hale. Is he available? Available. To avail upon. Haleable, she laughed and stepped back, gesturing us inside. Okay then. I almost stepped inside, but Revere held me back, a hand on my chest as he sent a quick spell before us, something about finding our way out again. Good thinking. He shot me a look like what was wrong with me. I shrugged because there was so much, mostly that another mage was giving Penny hot chocolate. I sighed and continued into the dim interior. Hale sat in an enormous chair in front of an enormous fire, his breadth in proportion with the massive house. He was a massive mage. I walked up to him, bowed shortly, and said without the slightest idea what I was doing, "I'm Huntsman. There's business I would like to discuss with you." He was looking through sheafs of paper and didn't look up for a long time while I waited. It wasn't actually a long wait, not for a sorcerer who had to bring all of his thoughts to one point of intersection when he'd clearly been focused on something else. Probably lots of things. Huntsman, thank you for your timely payment. Payment? Would you mind if I examined the paperwork? He tossed a sheaf of papers across the table towards me. I moved into the light of the fireplace and sat down, going through the stack. That was an enormous sum of assets and money. Yes, we had owned that and that and that in Darkside, all the properties near Dead or Redside, but apparently we'd given them to this hail fellow for. I searched through the paperwork and found an addendum with one name. Sooth. Ah. I shot Revere a delighted smile as I tapped the paper and leaned forward to fix my eyes on the wonderful sorcerer. I'm sorry to be the one to inform you, but these signatures are forged. Huntsman never paid for this debt. He furrowed his eyebrows but didn't speak for a long time, no doubt in deep, devious thought. I see. So you are here to withdraw payment. Not at all. I would adore you to be paid. I don't want to wander around taking an honorable sorcerer's living like some Dayside prince. No, I want you to keep everything except the small, insignificant title against Sooth. It's not doing you any good, not here lost in a pile of paperwork. What good would it do you? He had a laugh in his voice, which was odd for a Darksider, a sense of humor, but sorcerers were different. I hadn't really run into a lot of them, other than Penny's relatives. Good? Probably none, but you have to start somewhere. What do you say? Do we have an agreement? He put his palm flat on the table with a sudden sound that would have made me jump if I were even slightly intelligent. The debt is only partially paid. What would you offer for the rest? He slid the sheaf of papers to the side and I got to read the rest of the contract. The part where Sooth offers his daughter in exchange for a lot of things that I didn't see because everything was green and smelled of smoke and ashes and fire. I pushed back the chair and stepped away from the table before I consumed all those flammables. Sooth promised this sorcerer a penny for Hale's armies and alliance. There were so many armies. So many assets. Hale lived a half a world away from where his assets were, in the most thriving part of Darkside. I offer not to penalize you for your blatant disregard for the Devil's Treaty. Hale cocked his head. My sweet wife and I were married before the treaty, which I signed after I established the clause making an exception for my precious love. Each word was a threat, particularly precious, and love was always a threat. I ran my hand through my hair and started pacing. Your wife? What would you do with Sooth's daughter if you're already married? I have a son, a Daysider like you. I thought they would be well matched. I stared at him. He stared back. Because she's an aberration. Because she has no magic. She will alleviate his madness and never succumb to her own. That's the curse of Darkside, the madness. He gestured to the papers spread across the table. It's a small price to pay for such a creature. I see. If you refuse to release Sooth's title to me, you will have to reimburse Huntsman. Of course. I've already taken care of it. He nodded behind me. I turned and there was a nice sack of what smelled like chemical compounds of the rarest sorts. The rest will be delivered shortly. I always make good on my debts. You see, I enjoy the order in the chaos. How did you track this business interaction, if you don't mind my asking? I stared at Hale. He wanted to know so Sooth would have a heads up in the future. I have no idea. Everything is instinctual to me. It's terrifying how much I don't know, at least it would be if I thought about it. I don't. I hefted the sack, the weight of it ominously heavy, before I strode out. Thank you for coming, the woman said. I gave her a bow and a smile before continuing on. I couldn't attack another sorcerer in his own home without any armies or dragons or backstabbing blood brothers. Teddy. I was going to kill him. Later. Revere put a hand on my arm, and with the next step we were in the desolate yard in front of Penny's mother's house. It looked quite cheerful compared to the Darksider mansion. I whirled around at Revere. Did you know about the contract? That Sooth is selling Penny to Hale's Daysider son. Revere stared at me, face placid. He had to sell her to someone. I personally doubt if Hale is the only one he promised her to. Also, we didn't see the conditions of ownership, how complete it was. It wouldn't be a particularly bad marriage for Penny when you come down to it. Sooth and Hale's alliance is quite unfortunate. Hale is a very positive influence in Darkside. I'm sure I don't care. Hale isn't getting Penny. Of course not. As long as she stays out of Darkside and gets married before she turns 18, she'd already be married if you hadn't jilted her. And I'd be under Sooth's curse, which does sound fun. Now I'm worried about Stoneborough. Do you think Sooth has his claws into them? He gave me a slight smile. You should find out. How? He shrugged. I'll leave that to you. I have too much to do your thinking as well. Now for your lesson. Focus. You showed far too much reaction to Hale about Penny. He knows that your interest is personal. He drew his black fires word and I drew my green one. He was right about my reaction. I'd practically declared my love out loud. It was interesting that he'd married a human but stayed in Darkside. Strange mage. Penny would probably like him.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 8. Almost a week without Senior Mort went by in a blur of mage contract books, and most importantly, studying my grandmama's contracts with her notebook in hand. At first, it made no sense, but I kept at it doggedly until I finally had a clear idea of what the next step had to be. Not that it was particularly clear. I needed to find my grandfather's contract, the one he'd made for my parents. I needed to find that, or I wouldn't be able to protect Drake. Drake. He'd found me after ballet practice with Ian 3 days after my appearance in his room and held me tight, his face buried in my hair while he breathed, so deep, so heavy I thought I was drowning or being beaten to death by my own heart's pounding. After 15 minutes, he'd pushed me away and stalked off without a word, leaving me staring after him, just aching. It had been 3 more days. I left my last class early and headed down to the polo field. I went into the barn where his black horse Demon was kept. I fed him an apple and rubbed his velvety nose as I waited, but I didn't hear him coming. He pulled me against his chest, his hand curved around my missing ribs, fingers strong, unbreakable. "What are you doing here?" he growled. He had the most beautiful growl. "It's been 3 days," I said, while my heart pounded. He scraped his teeth along the side of my throat. Breath warm, hot. "Do you think that I'm too stupid to count that high?" "Then why did you ask?" The feel of his chest against my shoulder. My back was too perfect, too beautiful. He slid his hand up my arm while his teeth slid down my shoulder. "You shouldn't surprise me." "You surprised me." "You should have ripped me apart for it." "Is that what you're going to do to me?" "Yes." He inhaled, shuddering, then straightened up so only my shoulder was touching his chest and my name. If I'm not braced for Penny impact, bad things could happen. How bad? He laughed, a sound that went through me until I pushed back until I was once more pressed against him. "You smell like black cherry. So much black cherry I can't breathe." He pushed me away, and when I spun around, there was nothing but the lingering scent of ashes. I closed my eyes and tried not to channel my pitch energy into something that would destroy the barn and hurt sweet Demon. He'd just left. I shouldn't have said anything about him wanting me. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. That's the game he was playing. Love Penny without touching her, or telling her, or being with her. Two can play games, Demon. "I wonder if he'll like my next one," I said as I stroked the enormous horse's nose. It was Tuesday. I needed a finder. I took the bus to town. Zach glowered at me for bailing on his whole fixing Rosie thing, but he was playing nice mage, so he didn't protest too much. He'd probably stalk me, though. I was so precious. Had to keep precious things all locked up. I spent an hour with my princesses, telling them stories and noticing how little Anna wasn't very responsive. She was fading away. I couldn't touch her pain. I couldn't do anything about that, other than a nice pink lollop loaded with herbs that might help a little bit with her nausea. I smiled brightly at the guard outside of Drake's halfway house. "Want a lollipop?" He frowned at me in his serious suit and shook his head slightly. I couldn't see his eyes behind his reflective sunglasses, but I looked super cute. Perfect. I went through the doors and smiled at all the beautiful humans, handing out lollipops I'd crafted for each one. When I got to Missy, I pulled out an enormous lollipop the size of half my face. "For you," I said, and smiled at her as bright as I possibly could. She took it slowly. "Are you okay?" "So good." "You should unwrap it." She gave me a slight smile before unwrapping the crackly cellophane. I'd embedded little black licorice strands inside with the words, "Ask me to come to your room" in it. She glanced at me where I sat, bouncing on the end of the couch, sucking on my lollipop. She looked around at the other humans who weren't paying any attention to us, then leaned forward. "Do you want to come to my room? I have a new, lipstick I'm thinking about using, but it might not look good." I grabbed her hand, the one missing 3 fingers. "I'd love to. I haven't got reliable taste, just to warn you." She smiled slightly while she shook her head, then went into her room. She put her palm against the reader, and the door clicked open. Once we were inside, I leaned against the door and stared at her. "So, the lipstick?" I pulled out a notebook and started scribbling notes. "It's kind of stupid for me to wear lipstick. I mean, I'm not ever going to be pretty," she said, and walked over to a simple wooden dresser with a mirror above it and a tray where she kept her toiletries. "You have beauty questions for real? Oh, cool." "No, you're really pretty without makeup. But makeup is important when you want a little more oomph. Like going on a date or something. Missy, you looked super nice at church." She'd kind of hid between me and the bartender with her hair over her face through the whole sermon. But she'd done it, gone out around normal humans, and hadn't shattered or anything. She wrinkled her nose and picked up the hot pink lipstick. "When I was growing up, cosmetics weren't quite so bright." Yeah, hot pink isn't really going to do anyone any favors. Let me put together a really, really nice makeup set, taking in account your coloring and complexion. I may not have magic, but I know cosmetics. I can't help it. Grandmama's livelihood was built on pretty. I put the paper in front of her, so she had to read it. "How can I get in touch with Narcolo? I need a finder." She picked up the pen, adjusting it like she wasn't accustomed to it, before she wrote, "What do you need to find?" So she wasn't just going to go along with my plan without explanation. She was smart. I wrote, "My grandfather in Darkside. He has a contract about my parents' marriage that I need to see." She nodded and frowned in concentration as she wrote. Her handwriting was so beautiful, elegant, and she was like 80 years old. She didn't look older than 18. "You should ask the mage." She might have great handwriting and wisdom of age and all that, but she knew nothing about what I should do. That's not an option. Drake is doing his own thing, and if I tell him what I want, he'll only try to stop me. She frowned at me and tapped the paper. "Right." I wrote, "If I can't trust Narcolo to deliver, I shouldn't have asked. Sorry. I'll figure out something else." Teddy went to Darkside. He was diabolical. I shivered as I remembered his touch of sweet death. No, not the best choice. I'd ask Signor, but I already owed him for saving me from Teddy, at least according to Zach. I scowled while I thought through my options. She put her hand on my arm and pushed the notebook over so I could read her latest message. "He can get what you need, but you'll have to give him something he wants. I'll write the message for you. It has to be very, very precise. Do you have someone who can take a message to Darkside? I nodded. She gave me a slight smile with her head tilted. That made her look a little bit edgy in spite of her adorable eyelessness. She sat down on the bed and wrote out a message on a clean sheet of paper until she shook her head and started on a new page. It took her 6 drafts to have the perfect missive. She ripped it out cleanly and handed it to me. I looked down and stared at the Darkside letters I couldn't read. I stared at her. You write Darksider? She smiled slightly. A few languages. It's Darkside, not Darksider. You don't know it. She said something in a strangely sweet, guttural accent. I stared at her before I gripped her shoulders. Missy, you're so smart. You can help me write my mage contract. She laughed and patted my head. Not complicated contracts, just gettings. Gettings? Right? Findings? Can you translate this for me? I asked, waving the note she'd written that I couldn't read. She thought about it for a long time before she blushed and bent over the notebook. Direct translation loses some of its clarity. The basic message is a request for one finding in exchange for 1 hour of my untouched time. Human world. Human time. There are a lot of explications. No way you can't. She put her hand over my mouth and stared at me with her serious frown. She let go and then wrote again. I want to see him. I want to see him here in this world after the dark side has worn off. I need to think of him as my past if I'm ever going to go forward, but I'm having a hard time. I will do this for you and for me. I covered her hand with mine while my bottom lip trembled. Thanks, Missy, I whispered. She snipped off a strand of hair to enclose in the envelope. That should be enough to find Narkal, because he was part of that hair, because he'd eaten parts of her. So wrong, but kind of sweet. I wanted Drake to be part of me. I'd eat his toes. I'd give up my eyes to keep him. Really? If I could touch him for the rest of my life, it would be okay if it were dark. But I'd rather be able to look at him my whole life. We walked into the main room, and I gave Missy a quick hug before straightening. She cleared her throat. We should go to the movie tomorrow. I mean, if you want. A movie? She stared at me with that one big gray eye, and I nodded. A movie. We'd maybe meet Narkalo there. I owned exactly one mage that didn't own me in return and wasn't hiding from a second skinning. I took a deep breath as I headed out of the hospital, my hands shaking as I unwrapped a lollipop. I couldn't put Missy at risk, but what were my options? Anyway, I looked at it. Things could get messy. What if Cray attacked while we were in the theater? I pulled out my phone once I got to the parking lot, and there was Zach leaning against his little red hot rod. I put my phone away and walked up to him, swishing my skirt and holding out a lollipop. How did you know I needed a ride? He rolled his eyes but only smiled and opened the door for me. The nice friend gig was killing him. I really liked it. I kissed his cheek as I passed him, butterfly kisses, so my eyelashes tickled his cheek before I scrambled into the teeny back seat. How long until Rosie's ready? I asked as soon as Zach got in. Sooner if you stop skipping working on it to go hang out with your hospital friends. I guess it will have to wait. I heard you're going to the movie with Missy tomorrow. Yep. The common room was totally bugged, but would Missy's room be recorded as well? I'm a little bit nervous about it. I'm really glad Missy's coming out of her shell, but will it be safe? What do you think? He glanced over his shoulder at me before facing forward. You're asking me? Of course. Do you have any good gadgets I can use to keep Missy safe in case of a Cray attack or a scratcher thing? I do. He smiled sharply. But that kind of object is going to cost you. Never mind. I kicked the back of his chair because it was so tight and he was so annoying. He moved his seat back further, pinning me until his head was right next to mine. If I throw up on you, that's on you. Literally. He laughed and adjusted his seat so it wasn't quite on top of me. Penny, what I had in mind for payment was a date. To the movie. Tomorrow night. I frowned at the back of his head. That was probably a good idea. Dating Zach. If I was going to give him a marriage contract, I had to move in that direction. I scratched the back of my neck. If you don't think that would be weird, okay? Has to be a horror movie. I'm an idiot in those. An adorable idiot. You want me to sit in your lap the whole time? Basically. Why? Can't you smell my desire? I leaned closer and sniffed, but he only smelled like motor oil, which was kind of appetizing. No. He tapped the steering wheel with his fingers. Maybe I don't find the threat of Penny Lane vomit irresistible. Weird. I punched him through the seat, which did pretty much nothing. Super weird, but that's my awesome friend Zach, always wanting weird things like Penny Lane in a horror movie or the back of his car instead of letting her ride a bus on her own. Never mind. I don't want you in the movie with me. I'm taking Ian and Lester. Maybe Viney work. Yeah, she could take Oscar. Maybe Lars. We could make it a big party where everyone sits in different parts of the theater so Missy doesn't feel freaked out by all the Daysiders. He grunted and then spun the wheel to the side. So the car spun around, tires squealing. Strangely, I did not throw up. You okay? Zach said once we came to a stop before he shifted down and started back the way we'd come, down the hill towards Fairfield. I looked out the back window at the men on motorcycles who were apparently chasing us. Zach, why are motorcyclists pursuing us? Don't worry about it. How can I not? I started screaming. Then, because the car shot into the air above the road, veered to the side and almost into some trees, the motorcyclist took off after us. So this was a flying car chase. That's when I threw up. The rest of the flight ride was a blur of too much magic and even more motion sickness. Finally, the car came down with a thump on the road outside the Rosewood gates, tore through, and then a couple of silver cars pulled up after us, blocking entry to the motorcyclists. I watched out the back window, clinging limply to the rim of the back seat, while Viney and Whitley got out of the cars and stood half-crouched, like they were ready to throw curses or herders or something at the motorcyclists. Finally, Zach jerked to a stop and got out before I could knee him in the stomach. I crawled out after him and pressed my cheek to the cool pavement. It would be so nice if someone ran over me with a car before I threw up again. Take her to her room. Make her some tea or something, Zach ordered before I watched his boots pound over the pavement towards the motorcycle mages. Ian picked me up. No one else smelled like that. I gripped his shirt and tried not to throw up. Victory until I reached my room anyway. He sat next to me on the edge of the clawfoot tub while I vomited in the toilet. When I curled up in a ball on the floor, he said, "Do you want me to heal you?" I shook my head. It's not a healing thing. It's a cursed thing. Ian, I sat up and gripped his hand over the message. I carved a mage oath into his skin. You'll deliver this and say nothing to Drake or any other witch or mage. Swear you will. He frowned at me, eyes sort of glinting with amusement. If you'd like. This smells like trouble. I smiled brightly. I hope so. Go now before anyone comes back. Go on. His scowl darkened before he stood and stepped through side, away from me. Ian was on his errand and out of my bathroom. That's what you call multitasking. What would Drake do when he found out I'd been messing with his humans? He'd told me enough times that whatever he owned belonged to me. I ran my fingers over the initials in my shoulder.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 9. What are you going to do about the TMD? I didn't look up from my end of the table, scratching my pen over lines that went on and on eternally. That's a job for the premier families of Dayside. My father laughed and for a moment put down his pen. I hesitated before I put down mine and looked up at him. His eyes were dark, amused. I've been considering your words. I could remarry. It was my turn to laugh or snort anyway. Oh, that sounds like it wouldn't end in complete disaster. He tilted his head. But in the meanwhile there would be a great infusion of money and power to huntsmen, which neither of us particularly cares about. But by all means, if one of us must marry, it had better be you. You have more recent experience with marriage contracts. True, I know exactly how to break them. I showed him my teeth and bent back to my paper, but it was too late. I got up and stepped through side, then back to Penny's house. Revere was sitting on the porch steps, almost as though he were waiting for me. Is there something I should be doing about the TMD? They've attacked Penny again. Huntsmen should probably join Stoneborough in their suit against them. You should get your contract mage involved in it. Jasper's been compromised. He's the one who woke up Sooth. That's doubtful. The sleeping Sooth has been resting for a very long time, and our current deception sorcerer is quite active. And we know this. How? He shrugged. I checked. Would you like to accompany me on an outing? It will be less business, more blood than the last one. I would absolutely adore a blood-soaked outing. Let me get changed. He waited while I spelled my suit closer to its actual beautiful state, the coat woven through with as many protection spells I could lay on it without interfering with its own magic. I didn't want any damage done to that coat. She did good work, he said once I was finished. I fingered the front fabric and the fabric moved beneath my hand, caressing me back like it was her. She loved me. I inhaled deeply, then straightened up. Shall we? We actually worked on spellcraft for days, months, years, until I was exhausted mentally, and then we went to Darkside and collected more bills, those we took by force. They were small, but apparently we were collecting every one of the deception sorcerer's bills, particularly the ones he'd paid off with my family fortune. I stepped back into Dayside, inside my bedroom with a splitting headache. Zach was waiting for me. What are you going to do about the TMD? I summoned a cup of orange bergamot tea and sat down on the couch to drink it. That's for Dayside's premier families to worry about. Why? Didn't you enjoy fighting them off? Zach showed me his teeth. No, I had to use Ian to keep her safe. I offer my personal services against the TMD as a contract mage of a humble Dayside family, if you'd like. He flung himself on the couch beside me. I would. If you wanted to call in favors, you could still make a mess of things. You have something on every family. Thank you. You make us sound so wicked. How are things coming with Penny? My chest throbbed at the mention of her name, even if I was the one who said it, especially then. She's going to a movie with Missy tonight. That's why I'm here. She's inviting all of her special friends to sit around the movie theater not too close to her and Missy. She doesn't want Missy to get freaked out. A movie? That's great. Is it? I'm worried. Penny's been smiling a lot lately. My chest ached. Maybe she found it so easy to love she would quickly forget about me as she involved herself with her pets. Good. She probably has a plan for her next husband. You won't let her marry anyone else. You've told her that, haven't you? He shrugged, scowling at me. I'm trying to be nice. That's what she thinks she wants, which is why the movie theater is going to be full of the wickedest mages in school, along with her chem girls and Viney. I nodded. What time not that I wanted to sit in a theater and stare at the back of her head, but I did. Also, it was in case of emergencies. Something bewildering could happen, possibly involving popcorn. Like a popcorn monster could try and eat everyone. No one was eating Penny except for me. My mouth watered at the thought of her skin. He laughed. It's a horror movie. She'll be next to me. So I'd have to watch her cling to him like he was her teddy bear. I growled but nodded. It would be. There's a popcorn monster. What? I shook my head and made shooing motions. I have about 2 hours of sleep before the movie. I'm going to use them as thoroughly as possible. After taking my much-needed nap, I sat inside the darkened theater wearing the glamour of a nice human girl. Other than that, Zach had bought out the theater, so the only occupants would be people from Rosewood. Penny came in with Missy and Zach. I could hear her clearly. Are you going to be okay with horror? I'm a complete mess during this kind of movie. You might want to cover your ears in case I scream a lot. Shut up, Zach. He didn't say anything, just rolled his eyes and followed her into the middle row in the center of the theater. She turned and pointed at him. Get popcorn. In. So you can throw it all over the theater when the psycho killer comes out from behind the tree? Good idea. He stood and looked at me, nodding slightly before he headed back out to the lobby. Lester came in and took his seat, back left. Penny's chem girls took a few rows towards the front, jaggedly spaced out. Where was Ian? I hadn't been able to get hold of him, but I'd left messages. He was probably in Darkside seducing a cray or 16. Viney came in with Oscar. They were scowling at each other and the rest of the movie theater before they moved to the back row. They probably wouldn't be paying much attention to Penny or the movie. It was good to see them together. Zach came in with more popcorn than a human could possibly eat, so Penny would have no problem with it. The movie started, previews of other horror movies that Penny didn't quite watch. She gripped Missy's hand more than Zach's. How did I feel about that? I should be next to her, stealing her popcorn or buying it, or both. She was tense, and not just from the promised horror. Ever since we'd come back from the island, she'd struggled to maintain the bubbly macaron personality. She missed me. Now she missed me and Senior Mort. I cursed under my breath. The swamp tourney was still weeks away. I'd need to get video or a visit or something to make certain Senior Mort was okay. I hadn't seen Teddy. I should hunt him down, see what game he was playing, but if it was a catch-a-witch game, I'd kill him. Killing him would take a lot of effort. I shifted in my seat as I watched Penny. Someone walked down the aisle to my left. Ian. Good. He'd gotten my messages. He nodded at me and kept walking, heading into the aisle directly behind Penny. He stopped a little to her left, diagonal from Missy. She turned around to see who it was and froze. She must have recognized that he was a mage. She turned around quickly and gripped Penny's hand. Missy leaned close and whispered, "This is going to be a long hour." It wasn't, not particularly. The movie was an hour and a half. Penny screamed 8 times and almost knocked over the popcorn 3 times, but Zach was diligent and captured every kernel, except the 3 that were in her hair. I stared at those kernels of popcorn while my mouth watered. My heart pounded while my chest ached to snatch those stupid bits of puffed corn. When she turned and buried her face in Zach's chest, pretty much climbing into his lap, Zach patted her absently and snagged the bits of popcorn, dropping them to the floor. He didn't eat them. What was wrong with him? They tasted of Penny? How could he possibly not eat them? He turned his head and looked at me, an almost apology before he faced front and wrapped his arms around her more tightly. Ah, he was doing it for me. I leaned back and kicked my feet up because watching Penny without touching her was the most exhausting thing in the world. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep through the rest of the movie. Finally, the final scene left Penny screaming for a solid 8 seconds, which was impossible to even pretend to sleep, though. I glanced at Ian, sure he'd be watching Penny with amusement we could share, but he wasn't watching Penny. He stared at Missy. Stared wasn't the right word. Stalked, staked out, focused and isolated her as though she were the only thing in this world. Even when Ian was intent on seduction, he didn't use that level of focus. I stood up and yelled, "Darksider," at the same time I cast a spell. It struck his shield and glimmered silvery blue against the sphere in that moment, showing that it surrounded both the Darksider and Missy. Narcolo. I'd bet my top hat on it. I let my glamour break because I hadn't sounded like a cute blonde human. The Darksider didn't even look at me. All the Rosewood students did. They started moving towards the Darksider, Penny's chem girls stumbling over themselves. Narcolo's Ian glamour faded and revealed himself, well-groomed for a Darksider but still gnarled, eyes sparks of pewter beneath his protruding brows. He took Missy's hand. She turned her head to look at him, staring as though he were the most beautiful thing in the world. He was going to take her to Darkside with him, and I wouldn't be able to find him. Or her. Penny stepped through the shield like it didn't exist and took Missy's other hand. She said something to him while Zack screamed and cursed the sphere and took out a gun, almost shooting before he realized that Penny and Missy were vulnerable. The Darksider glanced at Penny, nodded slightly, then raised Missy's hand to his mouth. He was going to bite off a few fingers. No. He kissed the back of her knuckles, whisper soft and slow before he vanished, the shield along with him. Missy collapsed and Penny knelt in front of her, completely ignoring Zack, who was still yelling mostly expletives and waving his weapon around. Someone should be calm. Was that me? I lightly leapt to the top of the chair and after 5 jumps came down beside Zack. I put my hand on his shoulder, lowered his weapon and holstered it, ignoring his shaking hand and the fact that he couldn't stop yelling. Finally, I shoved him at Lester, who obligingly stepped through side with him, taking him somewhere else. The theater was surprisingly quiet without Zack, so quiet I could hear Penny breathe in and out like she'd been in a race. She'd been afraid. Well, Missy, it looks like you've had quite the outing. Let's get you home. Penny, feel free to ride with us. I scooped up Missy and started walking out of the theater. Missy was so small, so fragile, but her heart beat so strongly, so loudly, more than it had the entire time she'd been with me. Would that much beating break her heart? I stowed her in the back seat and then got in the driver's side. I waited until Penny scrambled in next to me before I took off. I drove moderately well considering the fact that inside I was screaming and waving even more weapons around than Zack. Missy sobbed from the back seat and I turned my head to shoot Penny a look of complete and utter irritation. I would charge you with willful destruction of my personal property, but Missy doesn't belong to me. You met her master. You took her to him. Why? Her eyes went wide before they narrowed. It's none of your business. Missy and the other humans that I bothered to retrieve and rehabilitate are precisely my business. You are not, Missy is. Who is the devil of Darkside? Missy asked in a soft voice from the back. I slammed on the brakes, shoved the SUV into park and turned to loom over Missy. She held a small note in her fingers. She didn't protest when I retrieved it, and she didn't look at Penny. I looked at Penny and she was torn between fury towards Missy and anger at me. So much anger sizzled over her skin, but most of it was directed towards herself. She knew better than to get Missy mixed up in her games. I read the note. How nice! The devil of Darkside was willing to deliver what Penny requested personally at whatever time she found convenient in the next week. What did you request? I asked, glaring at her. She lifted her chin. I was going to break it with my lips if she pointed it at me for very long. It's none of your business. As long as I own you, it's my business. This whole thing is a game to you, but dragging in Missy. You don't take advantage of the vulnerable. She lunged towards me, barely stopping short of my face. She smelled so delicious, so sweet and spicy and angry. I wanted to lick the anger off her skin until she drowned in a pool of my acid. I swallowed while she glared. Drake, what do you call dumping me at the altar the minute you found out I had no magic? What do you call everything you do at Rosewood, making girls love you, mocking them for it, reveling in adoration that you will never return? I call it rational. I couldn't possibly love all the girls who love me. How could I possibly choose? It would be an exercise in cruelty to have only one witch, and I lack Ian's stamina. I can't have them all. She got such a sad look on her face, and the anger drained out of her, leaving her slumped against the door. You're right. I never should have involved Missy. It was a mistake. I thought he was going to take her. I never would have forgiven myself. He's terrifying. He wants her. Wants isn't a big enough word. Mages possess, Missy said quietly, putting her hand on Penny's curls. Like your mage craves to possess you. Here's the other one. Penny's door was ripped open and Zack was there. He grabbed her arm and hauled her out. I very nearly caught her other arm and held her back, but that would probably rip her in half, and I'd worked so hard to let her go. It was a long time later before I realized Missy was still in my car, and I was sitting there staring out the open door where Penny had been. I shook my head and closed the door before pulling out and heading back towards the hospital. "I'm fine," Missy said in a voice tinged slightly with amusement. I glanced over at her. Her one eye sparkled and she had a small smile on her lips. "That's good to hear. Why did you do it?" I needed to see him again, to know if the memories of him were better than the reality. And the memories are not nearly as good. I still love him, but not because I'm his slave, because he's Narcolo. "Does that make you happy?" I asked, facing front. Something made her happy. "A little. There are different kinds of Darksiders. It's nice to know that I love the best kind. Also, Penny is amusing." I sighed. "Isn't she? She arranged that entire meeting so she could get that message, and you didn't even notice her steal it out of your fingers. She has very quick hands." I glanced down at my hand where I'd been clenching the note, and she was right. Empty except for a lollipop. I undid the cellophane wrapper, which crinkled pleasantly in my fingers, before I sucked on the ominously gray-looking thing. It tasted like love.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 10. He'd written it in Darksider. That meant I headed to the library in search of the books on Darksider. Fun, fun, fun. Most of the Darksider symbols were what a witch used in spellcasting, but I didn't need to know any of that. While I was searching out the symbols that matched the marks on my letter, Lester came over and sat beside me. I didn't expect him to speak, but his large forefinger was over my shoulder, pointing at a symbol. Darkside. It's a title word. Like the finder of Darkside. Or the devil of Darkside. That's devil. He pointed to the other word. I turned to frown at him. I'd specifically covered the whole thing with my body so he couldn't read it. Did you want something? You're meddling in sticky business. Would you like a hand? Only if you chop it off first. He smiled a slow, sleepy, utterly seductive smile. I could grow another one. I couldn't help laughing. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for coming to the movie. You screamed a lot. I winced. I do that. Horror movies freak me out. Zach thinks it's hilarious. It was very funny. Are you going to marry him? I stared at him. The calm way he asked, like it was a math problem. I hesitated, then nodded. I think so. I'm trying to work out a loopholeless contract. The devil in Darkside will help you with that? I shrugged. I hope so. Can I see? Reading it through your body is a little distracting. Distracting? If I'm not careful, I start seeing through your clothing instead of all of you. Or your skin, or other layers. I stared at him. You could not look at the letter. He hesitated, then shook his shaggy mane, his half-shut eyes glimmering slightly. Did you see Ian? He's under an oath not to disclose where he's been, but he's extremely upset. I don't think that he's going to take another message for you. I stared at him. That's right. Narcolo had been wearing Ian's glamour, but I had no idea where Ian was. He's back. He nodded. He looked fine, just a little irritated. He could have been much worse if your Darksider friend wasn't feeling friendly. I started tapping on the desk with my pencil. And you're offering to deliver my messages? Why? Isn't it dangerous to you? He shrugged and pressed his large hands against the table. I'm still interested in an alliance with you. You're a very interesting witch. I wrinkled my nose at him. Now you'll have to ask Zach for permission. He smiled back. A half smile that was terribly attractive. He was no doubt completely wicked. I suppose you'll have to work it in your contract. How can I trust you? You can put me under mage oath, he said. Like that wasn't incredibly invasive. It was. Mages hated anything that kept you honest. I narrowed my eyes as I stared at him. How did I know he wasn't some other mage wearing a Lester glamour? I leaned over and inhaled the skin of his neck, tugged on his hair, and then gripped his hand. I sank my energy into him, searching for his spark, his core. Lester. Nice and black, just how I like them. I let go of him, and then realized that I'd been acting a little bit like a lunatic. Sorry, I was just... He covered my hand with his. I'm Lester Gretel. I will deliver your message for you if you'd like. And you'll die if you ever touch my witch again. Zach's voice was strangely cheerful. I rolled my eyes and gave Lester a half apology before turning to my idiot master slave. This isn't any of your concern. He pulled out a weapon and aimed it at Lester. His smile was seriously unbalanced. If you move or shield, the blast will ruin the bookshelves and some books. I moved around him, yanking the weapon out of his grasp and smashing the butt into his face. Blood dripped from his nose while I backed away. Then Lester was there. A very sturdy, comfortable presence. Lester stood in front of me and started talking to Zach in Darksider. I really should learn that language or something. To be honest, I didn't want to deal with Zach. He'd lectured me the entire ride back, how stupid and irresponsible I was, and how I was going to give him a nervous breakdown before he was 20, and how could I risk one of my stupid pets. Anyway, too much. I turned and headed out of the library, Zach's weapon in tow. I got to my room and started a batch of herders. If Zach came in, I'd shoot him and herder him. By the time I had a row of pretty little herders on my shelf curing, I felt like a serious idiot. I really shouldn't have sent Ian to make contact with Narcalo. I'd been so sure the Darksider was going to bite off Missy's fingers and swallow them whole, but he hadn't. She'd kind of betrayed me to Drake. Not entirely, but she still thought I should make Drake help me. I couldn't. Even if he wore my initials, he didn't belong to me. He couldn't, or he'd be tied to my father. I scheduled a delivery and went to bed with a copy of my favorite marriage contract tome. The next morning, I waited for Signore, holding my packages to my chest. What if he didn't want packages? What could I possibly give him? He wouldn't like delivering messages for me to some terrifying Darksider, who happened to be my grandfather any more than Drake or Ian. I could have asked Lester sometime when Zach wasn't watching, but it would be dangerous for him. When Signore drove up in his brown delivery truck, I stood up, brushing the dust from my skirt. I smiled brightly as he got close. He seemed tired when he got out of the truck, moving slowly. Cara mia. What do you have for me today? He smiled at me, a flash of dangerous brilliance before he resumed his professional facade. What do I owe you for saving me from Teddy? He raised his eyebrows. Nothing. You take my pain. It is more than you know. I took a step closer to him and held out the herders. Please, I want to ask you for a favor, and I hate owing people. I'd rather pay you. He narrowed his eyes and studied me for a long time. There is something you could give me, but you wouldn't like it. I shivered, but only shrugged. Name it. A kiss. A kiss? My heart kind of lurched at the thought of kissing my deliveryman. I'd been half in love with him as long as I could remember. He'd always treated me like a little sister or cousin, something not romantic, however passionately I declared my love. Why do you want to kiss me? He laughed, a low growl that rumbled. Ah, Karamaya. Not a pleasant kiss, but it is something I desire. I licked my lips and stepped closer to him. He gripped my shoulders, holding me still. You give too easily without holding back. you could give too much one of these days? I already gave Drake my heart. It was too much, but I can't even regret it. He scowled darkly. You should. Waste of time is what he was, and introducing you to the worst sort of mages. I took his hand. I thought that was you. He laughed again, throwing back his head. Ah, yes. Teddy Prince would be like me if he had a darker heart. Why can't I marry him, other than it turning me into a mass of angry death? Ah, cara mia, he would take you to Darkside. Death waits for you there. I remembered my father and felt a bit dizzy. Right, because you'd kill me. Although he offered to kill me for you, so that would be a bit of a mess. He's out then. Very out. What favor do you require? If it's in my power, it's yours. I licked my lips. So there's this guy, the devil of Darkside, and I'm going to have dinner with him at the Chinese place tomorrow night. But he doesn't know it yet, so I'd like you to deliver my message. He stared at me for a long time. He doesn't know it yet. He doesn't know where we're meeting. He knows we're meeting. I mean, he offered to meet me, and I'm agreeing to it. Hopefully, he doesn't steal the rest of my ribs or something. I winced because I hadn't meant to admit I knew about that. But Signora didn't say anything, only gazed at me with his solemn eyes and nodded. I will. I will also stay for the encounter and ensure your safety. I exhaled before I leaned my forehead on his shoulder. Thanks. I'm kind of freaking out about this. I'm playing a very scary big game. If I lose, you'll kill me. He wrapped an arm around me, solid as stone. We'll let the death dragon do it. I laughed and straightened up. Okay, so this kiss. He nodded towards his truck. I will claim your kiss in the back. We will have to go somewhere else. Somewhere between worlds. Between worlds? He nodded soberly. It's a very humid place. It rusts my engine if I run along those roads too often. Sounds dangerous. He gave me a smile that was the definition of dangerous, but I only felt like he'd protect me from the rest of the wolves. I glanced at him a few times as I climbed into the truck. I loved Drake helplessly and idiotically, but Signor wanted to kiss me. It was like Pitch coming to Zack and being all, let's make out, or something. Surreal. Also, he said it would hurt. I should be worried, but pain wasn't a big deal. Maybe it would be like kissing a rock. That made sense. I sat in the passenger seat as we drove out of Rosewood, down the road, and then shifted into a different world that was all smoky mist in shades of green. Signor's headlights illuminated a road, 2 ruts through dead-looking grasses. When I inhaled, it was like trying to breathe through a layer of water on my face. Very humid, I said. He gave me a slight smile before he continued until he pulled off the road beneath the broad branches of a tree. So, this isn't Darkside? No, I would never take you there. Shall we? He stood and gestured into the back. My palms were clammy and my stomach tangled into knots. I shouldn't be kissing Signor, even if Drake refused to marry me. I straightened my spine. Why not? He'd kissed all those girls, recovering from my protection spell. This was something like a kiss to break a curse, or something experimental. In the back of his truck, I walked over to the couch, but Signor continued to the very back where a black curtain fluttered that I'd never seen before. In fact, I was pretty sure that part of his truck hadn't existed before now. He looked at me for a long moment before he smiled sadly and drew the curtains back. The smell hit me first, putrid, rotting, dead body stink. Also urine and vomit. I started breathing through my mouth. This is my brother. I stared at Signore. then at the creature shackled behind the mesh bars that kept his body completely immobile. His eyes opened, and the pale yellow was a nice, creepy color. He hissed and spit speckled my super-cute plaid skirt. "Hi, I'm Penny!" He lunged towards me, but nothing really happened except for more spit. I took a few steps away from him to get out of range, but Signor put his hand on my elbow and led me back. The kiss. "Please, go ahead." I stared at him, then at the monster, then back at Signor. "You want my kiss for your brother? How disappointing. I should have known you wouldn't actually want to kiss me. I am too stupid. Right, let's get on with it. Then too stupid, right? Let's get on with it then." I walked over to the monster, grabbed his ripped clothing through the mesh, and kissed him as hard as I could. His teeth were sharp. My lips and tongue were ripped and torn until the taste of blood drowned out the taste of rotting. I kissed him anyway. If Signor wanted me to kiss a monster, I'd kiss a monster. I'd kiss 100. That's just the kind of imbecile I was. I kissed him harder, pressing my teeth into his lips. Not quite stone, but not quite human flesh. The taste grew stronger as his mouth parted against mine. Some part of him had realized that we were kissing instead of eating. Convenient, because I was missing bits of my tongue. I didn't even like kissing with tongue. So gross. Particularly Signor's brother's tongue, but I only gripped him tighter and kissed him deeper. The more I hated it, the more I drew out of him, pressed into him, until his lips became soft and gentle against mine. I slid my hands up, over his face to the tufts of hair pressing through the iron mesh that bound him. I kissed him until he ended the kiss, pressing his lips together and pulling away as far as he could while he was held immobile. I went down fast. Signor caught me before my face slammed against the black metal floor. He swung me up and carried me to the couch, setting me carefully down before running his fingers over my ripped and swollen mouth. He frowned before he absently put his fingers to his lips, fingers red with my blood. "Karamaya, your blood is sweet. You should have taken the kiss." It was amazing because that's the kind of kisser I am. I'd meant to say that, but it came out more slurred and blurred because my tongue wasn't really all there anymore, and neither were my lips. He smiled slightly before he went to the bar and poured me a drink. The drink mostly went down my shirt, which was fine because I was going to burn that entire outfit the second I got out of this revolting mess. Stupid Penny. Only princesses got to kiss princes. Witches got monsters and frogs that stayed frogs. Everybody knew that. I started shuddering and convulsing, like after a tourney. Fun. Throwing up was even more fun. Signor stayed with me, petting my hair and cleaning up my mess, running his fingers over my mouth every once in a while. What a lovely, dulcet delight you've given me. It couldn't have been done better, brother. The voice was dark and rumbling like Signor with a hint of honey drizzled over it. I looked past Signore's shoulder and saw the monster. But his eyes were focused and his expression almost human. If you hosed him down for a few days, he'd probably smell passable. I winced at the taste still in my mouth. It would never go away. I would never kiss a mage again, particularly Darksiders. Particularly Signor's relatives. He was seriously testing my loyalty. He murmured a few words in Darksider as he pressed his thumb against my forehead. My lips started feeling a little bit less numb, more screaming. Nice. He got up and turned towards his brother. He threw his arms wide. Brother, it's been decades. You were lost and now you are found. Signore's brother laughed, a light sound coming from so much yuck. Not so much found as retrieved. His eyes shifted to me, the pale yellow clear like a moon shining through deepest darkness. Not nearly as gross, but still disturbing. My thanks, fair madame. I didn't smile because that took things like mouths. He kept his eyes on me as Signor walked up to him, gripped his face with one hand, and then shoved his other hand deep into his chest cavity and pulled out a beating heart. I'm not even kidding. This pink, slimy thing twitched in Signore's hand while blood went absolutely everywhere. I was burning my shoes too. I sat up and went all dizzy because that kiss had taken a lot out of me, or I'd taken a lot out of Signore's brother. Pain, madness, despair. Yeah, I'd kissed him sane, because Signore preferred to murder sane people than crazy ones. I was doubting Signore's sanity when he started eating the heart. Yep. Totally nutso. Someone started laughing hysterically. Was that me? It was. I had to get out of there before Signore ripped out my heart. At least Drake hadn't done that to me, literally, and eaten it. Although, maybe that would be sweet if Drake did it. It was not sweet to eat your brother's heart. Was it? Things were getting so weird. Then Signore started glowing. He glowed black. Revere did that sometimes, which didn't make sense except that he'd said I was seeing the energy, not color. Signore walked over to me, his boots making prints in the thick blood underfoot until he reached me and put his bloody hand on the back of my neck and pulled me upright. Energy. I felt like I'd gotten electrocuted in a bathtub. Not that I'd ever actually gotten electrocuted. I jumped out of the tub fast when Poppy wanted to see what would happen. Everyone was mad. And now I had enough energy to stand up. Just kidding. I jumped and stumbled into Signore, then off the bar, and then back into Signore. His hand slid around my waist and he held me tight. Energy. So much energy. He trembled with it, so much more energy than anyone should have. It bled out of him and threaded out into the truck, around and back into him and me, a circuit that was completely unnecessary. I had my own energy issues. I didn't need Signore's. I couldn't move, though. Who can move when they're being electrocuted, even if it's not in a bathtub? After an eternity in Signore's arms, the kind of embrace I'd fantasized about a great deal, but had never come remotely close to. He finally pulled away, and the black glow dimmed to a slight shimmer when I looked at him from my peripheral vision. I shoved away from him once I could. What's your problem? Why did you do that to me? If you're going to murder someone, I'd rather not be the one who kisses him first. You kiss him and I rip out his heart and eat it next time. Got it. I touched my mouth because it was completely back together. How did you fix me? Did you break my protection spell? He brushed my cheek, and I felt a buzz of energy. I manipulated your energy. You fixed yourself. Convenient, isn't it? You want to see your grandfather. Why? I took a step away from him. You know him? We are allies. We fight Sooth, your father. You remember. I held up 2 fingers. Only a little. You can't go into Darkside to face him. He took another step closer to me until I was backed against the couch. I whirled around him and grabbed the biggest bottle off the bar, holding it up threateningly. He took the bottle out of my hand before I could quite register it, along with a glass, then poured himself a drink. Excellent choice. Surprisingly, raw beating hearts don't go down very smoothly. I stared at him, then sat suddenly on the metal floor. My teeth were aching and my ears rang. Signore sipped his drink and absently petted my head. Woof. You should have sent me to retrieve the contract from the devil instead of Narcalo. He's not a good mage to toy with. Not that I am. But we're already entangled. Entangled conveys some sense of mutual tangledness. I smacked his shins because he was still petting me. Ow. He had such hard shins. Cara mia. It weren't for you, I would be in a similar state as my brother is. Dead? Dead? Mad? Oh, you think I killed him? You ripped out his heart and ate it. It was very clear. There's blood all over the floor. I'm sitting in blood. I'm going to be sick. He picked me up and carried me back to the couch, running his hands over me as though he could wipe off the blood. Apparently he could, because I didn't see or smell any red stickiness as he studied me, kneeling beside me so his knees would be soaked. Cara mia, he has 2 hearts. He's not dead. I stared at him, frowning as I leaned over until my forehead was touching his. You have 2 hearts, but you have hardly any blood. You're made out of mostly rocks. That was a lot of blood. Do you dislike blood? What kind of question was that? Signore, I really dislike favors. Remind me to never ask you for another favor ever, ever, ever. Also remind me to never kiss a mage again. Also to never go somewhere so humid. The blood is never going to dry. My clothes were really cute. The saliva was bad enough. It's never going to come out. Never, never. Signore kissed me. It wasn't the kind of kiss I'd ever had before. It tasted like rocks. Soft rocks. And energy. Not the electrical kind. The sleep kind. That made no sense, but instantly I slumped over onto the couch thinking about rusty hubcaps.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 11. Signor brought me an unconscious penny and the news that she was going to dinner with the devil of Darkside. He also told me that I should kiss her as a favor to him, which I'd used up with the information about the devil and Darkside's date with Penny. I would have said something, possibly objected, but I couldn't seem to do anything other than hold the witch he'd dumped into my arms. He was different. More buzzing, dangerous, deadly, and he'd just traded a kiss for information. That meant I had no choice but to kiss her. Why was he asking for those kinds of favors? I would have asked, but he turned and walked away, each step a clang of doom. I took her to my bed, but I kept my shoes on. Nothing terribly interesting could happen if I kept my shoes on. I should call Zach, make him kiss Penny. For some reason I couldn't quite do it. She looked perfectly fine, but she was saturated with buzzing mage energy and she smelled like Darkside. I lay beside her and stared at my ceiling, considering the complexities of life. For a good 30 seconds I waxed philosophical before I buried my face in her hair and let my hands skim over her bare arms, knees not much above the knee. I swear it. I held her too tight, but I couldn't relax my grip, not for a very long time, while she remained unconscious. I should get it together, but I was so very tired of not crushing Penny Lane. One moment she was nestled against me, completely compliant. The next she straddled me, holding a dagger at my throat. My dagger, come to think of it. She gazed at me for a long time. Is this a dream? What would she do if I said yes? I don't think so, but I have so many dreams of you stealing my dagger and poking holes in me with it that I can't be sure. She kissed me, still holding the edge of the knife at my throat. Did this count as me kissing Penny Lane? She tasted like Darkside plus a few more interesting flavors, mostly like Penny. Ah. I let her kiss me like a good little hostage until she tried to pull away, and then I growled and gripped her, holding her tight while I kissed her until she parted her lips and then teeth, until I tasted her sweet tongue. She tried to pull away again and I rolled over on her. She bit me. Not hard enough. Her body was under me, all sharp points and soft curves, lines and edges like a complicated puzzle that would take me a lifetime to unravel. She kept struggling until I finally pulled away, green clouding my vision. She tossed my bloody dagger to the side and pressed her hands to my neck. She was going to heal me. I rolled off my bed and onto the floor in the most graceful falling off the bed known to mage. Bruised my tailbone, but I wasn't about to let Penny steal another scar from me. I held my hand to my throat and stared at my witch. Her lips were soft and wet, like she'd been kissed very recently and very well. Not well enough. Why am I in your bed? Signor brought you to me. He seemed to think you'd like waking up here. You must have told him how desperately in love with me you are. Poor Penny, in love with the worst mage at school. She frowned and leaned over her knees. Why won't you let me heal you? Her knees were so lovely, and her skirt had slid quite high up her thighs. Not that I noticed. I was too busy sitting on the floor bleeding out. I needed her to leave so I could fix my throat without losing the scars. It's my punishment for taking a knife to bed with me. I honestly expected you to use my shoes, not a knife. So what? My shoes instead of I shook my head. What was I talking about? I'd left my shoes on but had forgotten all about my knife. Was it a good thing to take a knife to bed with Penny Lane so she'd hold me hostage and force me to kiss her? Come to think of it, definitely. She got a little bit pale and green around the edges. I wish you weren't bleeding. No? Squeamish. She nodded and then ran to my toilet. There was no door on my toilet, just the usual ceramic set with bidet next to my tub. Maybe I should invest in one of those. Doors. She threw up so much, and she was throwing up in the bidet. Such an uncultured witch. I wanted to go over and hold her hair back or something involving touching her, but I did need to clean up my blood. I rolled it all off the bed and her clothes and back into my wound before I healed it, grabbing a paste from a cupboard and putting it on thick to help save the scar, then wove a glamour over it so my neck looked pristine and perfect. I ran a hand through my hair and walked over to Penny Lane. She was curled up in a ball, staring into space with a haunted look in her eyes. Is everything all right? No more blood. She grabbed my hand and tugged me down until I was squatting beside her. Drake, I miss you doing my laundry. She looked so sincere. The way she looked at me was so soft and vulnerable, so sweet and lovely. Was it an authentic look or part of her game? And what was her game? How was I supposed to play it if I didn't know what it was? I miss folding your silk panties. There's that blush. I miss that as well. I bent forward and kissed her nose. Do you want to tell me why you tasted like mad Darksiders? She winced. Did I? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have kissed you like that. Wait, you didn't seem to mind. I love kissing mad Darksiders. It's what I do on the weekends when I'm not eating mages with jello. She shook her head. You are such a confused mage. You're supposed to eat jello with mages. Jello has incredibly leathery skin. I have no idea how I could eat him. She winced again and put her face against my chest. Don't talk about eating mages. My heart pounded as I slid my hand through her hair. I carefully counted ears, fingers, but I couldn't check her toes unless I took off her shoes. Tongue. If I recalled her kiss, which I did, she had a bit missing from the left side. Have you been eating mages, Penny? How shockingly Darksider of you. I hope it's someone you like. It's not civilized to eat people you don't care for. She wrinkled her nose. Oh, that makes no sense. No, I just watched Signor eat someone's heart. It was she shuddered. Someone else's. I stared at her while she hesitated, then nodded. You kissed this person first. My heart was starting to beat rapidly in my chest. Ah, the mystery of Signor Ludi was about to become clear. Terrifyingly, heart-stoppingly so. His brother. That explains it. He must be the Prince of Darkness. He's very famous, at least his title is. There hasn't been a real Prince of Darkness for hundreds of years. The idea is that there are 7 sorcerers, brothers or bound together, something like that, and they all give their energy to one, the prince, but he can't take the energy unless they're sane. Theoretically, it's supposed to be a chosen thing. You give your energy to someone. Eating his brother's heart would explain the fangs. Fangs. Oh, sure. The Prince of Darkness is the king of the vampires. They're not really vampires, just Darksiders who like blood better than flesh. Has Signor drunk a lot of your blood? She blinked a few times. Not that I noticed. I mean, he did taste it after I'd kissed his brother and my mouth was kind of less there. I clenched my fist and smiled as though I were moderately amused. You should see the Darkside brothels. So much delightful ruin. You aren't well loved if you aren't mangled. So Missy was well loved. How? I hesitated. Her maiming was more academic than passionate. Such a delightful conversation, but the gist should be that your friend Signor isn't only a deliverman. Ah, secret identities, hidden motives, the drama. I've missed you. You think he'd be a less exciting reveal if I weren't involved. I brushed her cheek and kissed her nose. She had the most adorable nose. Naturally. Now tell me that he's a vegan, and I'll be charmed for the rest of the day. He ate a heart. Washed it down with hogsnass. I nodded sadly. Well, we can't have everything. All right, my delightful and delicious bathroom fixture. It's time for you to leave. I have business to attend to. So what? I stared at her, and then, she stared back. If I told you my game, would you tell me yours? She tilted her head slightly while her eyes went soft and large, telling you would ruin the surprise. Ah. Penny Lane surprises. How delightfully terrifying. She smiled bright and sharp. That's the idea. Do you think it would be prejudiced of me to use a different method of delivery? It's not that I have anything against vampires, it's just the eating of hearts in front of me. So messy. Stoneborough does extensive deliveries. Maybe I should go into delivering packages for audacious witches with questionable goods. It could be quite exciting. She slid her hand over my shoulder and the glamour over her still throbbing cut. Drake's Dragon Delivery, I'm sure it would do very well. I'd personally use your services loyally. I blushed. Me, Drake, captain of the chemistry club, was blushing like a Penny Lane. That meant that it was time for me to go. I cleared my throat and stood, taking a good 3 steps away from her. This conversation, as invigorating as it has been, must come to an end. Please see yourself out, Miss Lane. I stepped through side, hoping that she'd bedazzle something while I was gone. Ian found me in a med tent where I was patching together some men. Why was I still practicing healing when Penny had Ian and Zach to do that stuff for her? No idea, except that it seemed to be good for morale, and also I could keep an eye on the men I was supposed to own better that way without appearing too intrusive. Also, it was a little bit interesting to put people back together. He grabbed my shoulder and dragged me through side into his black bedroom, then back into Darkside, in front of a Darkside manor I'd never seen before. Ian nodded towards the house. I think that you should knock on the door. I frowned at him. Are you concussed or just schizophrenic? His mouth tightened and he nodded towards the house again. All right. I walked up the drive, using Revere's travel spell to reach the steps quickly. I climbed and then knocked on the door. It took about 3 minutes for the rather charming door, carved with your classic fairy tales, to open. Narcolo stared out at me, face impassive. He glanced at me, then at Ian, and turned, leaving the door open for us to follow or not. Ian nodded once, turned and stepped through side, leaving me on my own. I stood in the hall, the entire thing somehow charming, with little knick-knacks with doilies on the shelves, an old grandfather clock ticking in a somehow not menacing way, and the inlaid floor polished and nicely glowing. This was Missy's house. It was waiting for her like Narcolo was waiting for her. I wiped my boots on the mat and followed Narcolo. He led me into a room more mage than Missy, a study lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, which was 50 feet above us. It was a good room, good light for reading, a crackling fire for warmth and comfort, but the upholstery was all dark, massive, except for one bright blue chair beside the fire with an open book on the arm. Waiting for Missy. You waiting for Missy? What brings you here? Narcolo went to the table covered in bottles of various bright hues and poured 2 drinks. I took a seat that looked the least owned by someone else. The couch. He hissed and I stood, choosing a different place, one of those uncomfortable straight-back chairs meant for guests you don't want to stay long. Why did you meet with Missy? I'm concerned about her rehabilitation. Tell me about your witch. An aberration, but something else, something more. Hale wants her. I'm traditionally allied with Hale and Sooth, but Missy seems allied with you, with your witch. You speak of her as if Missy were a witch. Narcolo shrugged his fairly massive shoulders, Darkside standard. She spent 60 years in Darkside. I feel that she must have had traces of Darksider blood to adapt so well. Who are your allies against Sooth? I took the glass he offered me and took a slight sip. Remarkably smooth, like butterscotch liquor. This is nice. He smiled, the first smile I'd seen. It was a nice smile, not creepy at all, except that he was a Darksider, and so it was inherently more creepy to not look creepy. Missy's favorite. You are allied with the devil of Darkside. I turned my glass in my hands absently as I considered the possible developments of this conversation. Moderately. Allied against Sooth. With Huntsman paying off all his debts, I'd thought you were allied with him. I winced. Oh, that was a jab. Yes, stupid little Dayside mage can't see through a deception sorcerer. That seems to be a common misunderstanding. The Cray believed so as well. Your witch is Sooth's daughter, and... I shrugged. I have no definite proof in regards to that. How deeply is Missy involved with your witch? They have tea parties and slumber parties. Penny isn't a conventional witch. No, an aberration wouldn't be. It seemed to me with the way she stepped through my shield, she is also without magic. I blinked at him. He was impressive. It had taken Zack spelling it out for me to see that. And... He narrowed his eyes at me, and Missy would be charmed by that. She'd give her loyalty, probably. Probably. Penny tends to inspire irrational emotions. You seem very interested in the human's attachments. Are you going to steal her away? He shook his head, slow and steady. I can't steal what belongs to me. I sighed. How long are you going to allow her to live apart from you? I thought I would give her some years to live as a human, have some adorable children with a dull man before I took her back, but I begin to grow impatient. I studied him. Impatient wasn't one of his main character traits. The devil of Darkside had established a treatise regarding humans in Darkside, a law that this Darksider clearly had issues with. I was allying, sort of, with the devil of Darkside and the Prince of Darkness, two forces that were probably not the best representatives of the thinking, reasonable Darkside sorcerer. As if there were such a thing. I scratched my head. What I'm thinking is that the devil's law could use some tweaking. Did you really feed Missy human morsels? He hesitated, studying his very neon purple drink before he finally shook his head. Darkside witches, maybe a mage or two. I swallowed my next sip very carefully. Why is that? He raised his head. To prolong her life. She'll live for a very long time. At the expense of the lives of others. They were hunting her. They? Why would anyone go to the effort to hunt a human? There was a rumor that she was more than human. She was brilliant. You know how dull humans are, but she is like quicksilver. The first time I saw her, the mavens levitated all the new humans to see them panic and flail. She danced in the air like she'd been waiting her whole life for her wings. Utterly charming, not remotely human, and a bit mad. Heady combination. After I bought her, I took her with me on my findings. She had a knack for it. But then she started aging and I started feeding her my organs. I nodded because isn't that how it goes? One kidney at a time. Are you the one who notified me of the unhappy human that needed rescuing? Why did you want her out of Darkside? He shrugged. When she appeared at the Mavens utterly untouched and perfectly preserved, she stirred a lot of interest. Even after I took some pieces, there were those who wouldn't stop hunting her. That does sound irritating. You were unable to protect her. He shrugged. She's so vulnerable. They think of her as a witch. They could crush her in a moment's thoughtlessness. That's a lovely story, but it makes no sense. I've had Missy for 2 years, and while she's a lovely girl, she hasn't tempted anyone as far as I can see. He raised his eyebrows as he studied me. Perhaps I shouldn't have allowed her to blackmail so many. I stared at him. Blackmail can be troublesome. He smiled. But she enjoyed it so much. She had a knack for finding the truth and using it like a knife to gut you. I frowned at him. She said that she went to the Mavens to report the humans locked in your kitchen. Did that not happen? He raised his eyebrows. A thriving woman in Darkside for 60 years, and you think prevarication wouldn't be far more comfortable to her than honesty? What an interesting lie for her to tell you. Are you genuinely that honorable? So you sent her to Dayside to stay with me until you'd managed to deal with all those she'd blackmailed. I didn't think you could blackmail a Darksider. They're supposed to be shameless. He shrugged. There are always deeds done in darkness. I shook my head. Sweet, adorable Missy. It made me wonder a little bit about the other humans in my care. You did eat her eye on top of a pudding, didn't you? He nodded. She made it for me. Why did she go to the mavens? He shrugged. We had a difference of opinion. I told her that it was time to take her to Dayside, and she decided that I needed to be punished for that. How would that punish you? He glowered at me. She threatened the mavens. I had to rescue her and kill some of the least irritating Darksiders I know. Not the mavens, but several of their associates. Ah. So then you took her eye. She took it out and fed it to me. Brought me breakfast in bed, her eye socket stuffed with cotton. Is there anything more irresistible? I shouldn't have eaten it, but I was moved with affection. Love? Sometimes I wonder. Why didn't you wish to eat her parts if you love her? Then she is spoiled, and it will be more difficult for her to adapt to Dayside. I always meant to return her, but the time never seemed right. And she kept feeding you bits of her. He nodded. It would be rude to refuse. He shrugged. Very difficult. Being offered love to consume. I sighed and took a deep sip of the golden butterscotch with a very pleasant kick. It sounds as though she's kept you very entertained for a long time. Not long enough, but Darkside is still unsafe for her. Perhaps you should move to Dayside with her. I suppose I could have a home in Dayside. She would not be satisfied unless she found other games to play. Penny games are always delirious. Would you consider allying against Sooth, and if so, what would you require? As you say, adapting the Devil's Law would be helpful. Perhaps it would be the mistreatment of humans rather than the owning of them. Or perhaps we could go a long way and say humans are capable of choosing for themselves. He raised his eyebrows. Perhaps. It would require a new treaty. I nodded while my stomach fell out of my shoes. I was not a treaty mage, not like this. I wasn't really an alliance mage either. No huntsman was supposed to be mercenary, without sides, completely independent. Otherwise, you got involved in a skirmish where one side won and one side lost, and eventually huntsmen would lose, which would be extremely unprofitable. Winning and losing weren't important so long as you made a solid profit. I'm not a sorcerer in Darkside. I'm not accustomed to allying with them. He raised his eyebrows. You're a dragon lord. Surely that is enough to assuage your sense of inferiority as a Daysider. I gave him a hard smile. My sense of inferiority was not from that. I shall consider the possibilities of a treaty. You're the human rescuer. You're the green mage who fights with utter brilliance and lack of subtlety. You're inconsistent to the point of panic on which side you fight on or how you deploy your armies, most of which are now personally sworn to you. You are personally powerful enough to threaten any sorcerer who didn't have something over you, like Sooth has. I consider you a greater threat than the Prince of Darkness himself. I smiled. That was actually really nice to hear. Your flattery is epic. As I said, I will consider a treaty, but keep your expectations low. He studied me. Sooth is a threat that grows greater the more it is revealed. Hale is in bed with him in hopes of procuring the witch. Missy the Darksiders would fight for, die to take, but your witch, she is worth worlds. I winced. Which is why she's staying in Dayside, where you can protect her with a fraction of your assets. Exactly. We've had an extremely long conversation. Are you satisfied? He raised his eyebrows. You came to see me. Are you? I stood and shifted my shoulders. Not remotely. Now I'm terrified that your witch will corrupt mine. Narcolo smiled. Not nearly so nice. She's not a witch. And Carl isn't a necromancer. The things you do to humans are terrifying. I need to go cuddle a mouse. I stepped through side and came out in the parking lot of the Chinese restaurant. Signor's brown truck was parked next to an ostentatious black 56 Oldsmobile with a witch flying on a broom hood or an ornament. I walked inside and nodded at the server who stared at me, slightly panicked while I took a menu and headed to the booth on the other side of the restaurant from Signor. Penny sat with the devil, eating her Sequan chicken like she was starved, waving her arms around while she made a point. The devil ate his meal with slightly less intensity, but he kept his eyes on her as though watching for a crack in her glamour. No, she really was that lovely, that sweet, that capable of eating massive quantities of food. I hadn't kissed her long enough. A treaty. Ian had been interested in that sort of thing before Goldie hatched. Penny had some soy sauce on her chin. I was going to defeat Sooth, naturally, but working together with other sorcerers was an idiotic idea. That's why Narcolo wasn't proposing a treaty. Look at Penny's grandmother, who did the last one. Oh, you couldn't because she was locked up by the devil. They wouldn't sign a contract unless it eventually brought you into ruin and them into power over you. The devil looked up and met my eyes. For a moment I heard a scrap of their conversation. Penny said, in exchange for the contract, all you want is for me to name my first son after you? Why? I didn't hear the rest as the devil respelled his sound barrier. She was so beautiful. Devil Huntsman had a ring to it. I shook my head. Devil Stoneborough, not nearly as good. I got up and went outside. Seeing her with someone so dark and dangerous made my skin crawl. Seeing Signor as her supposed protector after what he'd done to her, nauseating and infuriating. I'd been trying not to feel anger. Once I started, it would be difficult to stop. Zack walked towards me from out of the shadows. You should go hunting. Why? Darksider sorcerers want me to make a treaty for them, ally with them. He frowned. Aren't you allying with them? He nodded into the restaurant. Here and there, but nothing long-term, nothing official. Making alliances is bad business. I know. I'll ally with you, if you'd like. I punched his shoulder. You always were a terrible businessman.
Deadly Morsel, Chapter 12. The Devil of Darkside was really nice. Not very grandfatherly, not with his whole vampire thing going on. All blatantly dyed black hair, dramatically receding hairline, and pasty white skin, and his red tongue. Maybe it was the Signor thing. Hearing he was some vampire prince mage that had vampires in my head. But the whole time I was waiting for him to count in a dramatic Transylvanian accent. He asked questions about my classes, how I liked living in Dayside V's, Darkside, like I knew the difference, and whether I liked doing herders better than tourneys. He clearly knew all my secrets. I had serious questions for him. So, how did Grandmama get you to marry her? He raised his dark eyebrows. She offered me her firstborn. Seriously? Only if I was the father of said child. Our marriage contract was a dizzyingly beautiful thing. I had to study it for years before I found the loophole. What loophole? He leaned back and steepled his fingers on the table. He had such long, slender fingers. Definitely vampire hands. I glanced over at Signor, who was eating his chow mein like he seriously couldn't care less. He should have had the Sequin chicken. He had nothing like vampire hands. Rock fingers. Are you looking for someone? The devil asked. I smiled brightly. Are you sure no one can hear us? He nodded. Very certain. He leaned over the table to study me. Truly, no magic. You can't see the weaves of my sound barrier, even if you concentrate? I shrugged and kind of leaned away from him. I can see your aura. It's pink. He smiled broadly, showing his red gums. Thank you. I'm having an extremely pleasant retirement. You're retired? What was your job exactly? He frowned and studied his hands. Conquering, conquesting, that sort of thing. That sounds exhausting. So now you're just hanging out with Grandmama, growing onions and roses? He shook his head. Not onions. He blinked, and his eyes met mine. He didn't say anything while he studied me, and I stared back. Grandmama wasn't dead. She was in Darkside with the devil. I'd thought he'd smelled like Grandmama's favorite lilac scent. He cleared his throat. This is awkward. You're a cad. Stealing people's grandmothers like that. He laughed and put his hand over mine. Just so. The very devil. He laughed harder while his fingers dug into my skin so electric, I barely managed to knock him off me and focus on eating my chicken. Drake came in at that point. I didn't look at him, but I could feel him, and I could feel my grandfather and Signora's attention focus on the gorgeous redhead, who strolled in like he wasn't in the presence of two nauseatingly dangerous sorcerers. I ate so much and so fast, I was pretty sure I'd throw up as soon as I left the restaurant. Hopefully, it would be worth it. I would throw up 100 times if he came through with the contract. After that visit, which was both horrible and extremely awful, I went into the parking lot, reeling from too much Szechuan and the knowledge that my grandmama was being held captive in Darkside by her husband, who was probably eating bits and pieces of her. Poor grandmama. She'd been gobbled up by a wolf so she could save thousands of humans like Missy. It was too dangerous to play games with mages. Zach waited for me beside his car. I stared at him. He stared back. My very own mage to play with. Pitch's mage, anyway. I went up to him and kissed his cheek, sticking a lollipop in his front pocket. He frowned at me and opened the back door of the monstrous car. Yeah, hi. I'm still going to lecture you on the entire ride back. I made a face at him and tried to steal back the lollipop, but he blocked my hand and climbed into the driver's seat before I could. So, the devil of Darkside? You didn't think Signor was dangerous enough, he asked as he pulled out of the parking lot. I'm starting to get ulcers. Dealing with mages is exhausting. It's like juggling magnum torches with lit fuses. Particularly Drake. Did you see him there? He didn't even try to wear a human girl glamour. How could I miss him? What are you doing? Trying not to throw up on your head. I appreciate the effort. I mean with the devil, Signora. What are you doing? Other than juggling? Narcolo. That's the name of the Darksider before this one, right? Ian's still irritated about that. Won't talk to anyone about what happened. Maybe finds it a little bit embarrassing. Ian's supposed to be shameless. What's with mages not living up to their reputations? I grabbed Zach's shoulder. If I wrote you a marriage contract, would you sign it? He covered my hand with his. That depends how beneficial it was for me. I pulled away, but he held my hand in his fingers, iron unbreakable. We would negotiate until terms were mutually beneficial. Are you thinking about offering me a marriage contract? Usually mages handle that side of things. The witch proposes? No. The witch does ethereal things like create herders. No one has ever seen before and seducing other men so the mage realizes the depths of his affection. Really? I can't imagine any witch I know doing that. Fine. Traditionally, a witch will bargain with another family's witch about their children marrying. She'll tell her husband to come up with a contract, and then the mages work on clauses and things while the witches try to convince the children it's a good match. That sounds more like witches. Not my mother. Would you have to meet her? It didn't work very well last time. I don't think that would be necessary. Are we really talking about this? Shouldn't we? He finally let go of my wrist. I thought you gave up on the whole thing. You haven't been dating or flirting with anyone. I'm still in love with Drake. Would that bother you? My heart pounded until he shrugged. I love Pitch. I am Pitch. Nah, you're definitely not. You don't even have injuries when you bash my face with a gun. I patted his head. Whatever. Your hair is kind of silky. This shampoo is really nice. My hair is nice, not the shampoo, although I drink it in the shower while I'm sudsing and He pulled the car over and turned to lean over the seat, his arms on the back while he stared at me. I expected to at least get a sniff of fresh baked bread. But nothing. You actually want to marry me? Why? Will you let me marry anyone else? Other than Drake? No. I shrugged. That leaves you. I'm not sure about the, bedroom issues. He touched my cheek with his fingertips, his eyes dark and gleaming. How could he look at me like that and not smell at least a little bit like baked goods? He said, We haven't ever kissed. It might not work out. If you're anything like Vine... I pressed my lips together. I wasn't kissing another mage for a very, very, very long time, although Zack couldn't possibly be worse than Signora's brother. Could he? It didn't seem possible, but things had been a little bit out of control lately. I've kissed your cheek, and you've kissed mine. Clearly we know everything we need to know about that. His gaze dropped down to my lips. They felt really big on my face all of a sudden, like I was pursing them out for a kiss. I bit my bottom lip and he bit his. I shook my head and stared out the window. Clearly, he said in a soft voice before he turned around and started the car. He laughed quietly in a way that sent a shiver of terror over my skin. He'd been trying so hard to act like a nice little mage, so I'd step into his jaws of doom. I sighed. There were so many jaws. At least he probably wouldn't taste like mad Darksider.